John Reid. John Reid was one of the 7 witches tried in 1697 Scotland. When he was caught, persecutors found that he had a mark on his loin. John said that the devil had nipped him there and that it indeed was a witch's mark. John also confessed that he was in service with the devil. The devil promised him wealth and abundance, but in return, John belonged to the devil. But John revealed that the devil broke his promise and never did anything he said he was going to do. On top of that, John admitted to attending a number of meetings with other witches. He also admitted that he was responsible for the torment of Christian Shaw. Christian was an 11-year-old who claimed she encountered a pack of witches who then bullied her and stole her milk. He also admitted that they all drowned her in the local well. As a result of his confession, it was very clear that he was a witch and he was locked away in a cell. The next day though, he was found dead. He had hung himself in his cell with his own scarf. It was believed that this was the devil's work. The devil convinced him to take his own life because John exposed him. Within the following weeks, the other witches close to John took their own lives in their cell as well. Again, it's thought that the devil possessed them and killed them off one by one because he was pissed with them. In our 4th spot, we have Janet Howat. Between 1661 to 1663, 44 people in Beaufort, Scotland were accused of witchcraft. 7 of those accused were executed. The fate of some of the others remain unclear. One of the main women was Helen Guthrie. She was not a nice lady at all. This woman murdered her own stepsister and the stepsister's children. But she was like, wait, I'll help you, and claimed that she was able to identify other witches just by looking at them. So she said she would help them in the witch hunt if they went easy on her. She then went on to make up elaborate stories of witches meeting up at graves and eating the flesh of other humans, etc. The more she made up and pointed fingers, the longer she got to live, and same with her daughter Janet Howat. Janet was also accused of being a witch like her mom. In fact, she had a witch's mark on her shoulder. She said it was from the devil biting it. She also said that it hurt for so long until the devil visited her again and stroked her shoulder. When he did that, the pain immediately stopped. Now, Janet was imprisoned with the rest of the accused, but we don't know what happened to her. They held a trial for her and no one testified against her. Plus, they only had the mark on her shoulder as evidence. We truly don't know if young Janet was let go or sadly killed. What we do know is that her plea date was 1666, 4 years after her arrest, so she was in jail for quite some time. In our 3rd spot, we have the Witches of Huntington. The Witches of Huntington were several individuals in the UK who were found guilty of witchcraft. First, we have Elizabeth Weed. Apparently one night, 3 spirits came to her and told her to renounce God and make a blood pact with the devil. So she listened, and that's what she did. John Winnick also did the same, but only agreed to if the spirits would help him out financially. Others, including John Clark Jr., were also visited by these spirits and decided to also renounce God and make a deal with the devil. Out of the 9 people accused, 5 were found guilty and hanged. Well, John Clark knew that they were going to search everyone's body for their witch's mark, which they all had. So what did he do? He cut off his 3 days before he was searched. Literally gouged it out of his skin so that the mark was gone. But I'm kind of confused because wouldn't that create another mark? I don't know, but I think he was let off the hook while he watched his friends be killed. He literally said, and I quote, "It was foolish to let the authorities find their marks. I cut off mine 3 days before I was searched." He then denied ever making a pact with the devil or being a witch, even though he was. Moving on to number 2, we have George Jacobs Sr. George Jacobs Sr. was an English colonist who was accused of witchcraft in 1692 during the Salem witch trials. George was quite the man around town. He had several run-ins with the law. He was known for having a violent temper, and in 1677 hit a man named John Tompkins Jr. 2 witnesses said, and I quote, "One blow, and if the latter had not held him by the arms, he would have struck him some more, he being in such a passion." Now, he was fined for this. Then in 1674 he was sued by his neighbor after he chased some of his horses into the river where they drowned. He argued that the horses were trespassing on his property, whereas others thought he just liked wreaking havoc on town. Fast forward several years later, George Jacobs Sr. and his son, George Jacobs Jr., and his daughter-in-law and granddaughter were all accused of witchcraft. Everyone got off except for Jacobs Sr., and that's because he had a witch's mark. His body was searched and they found what was described as 3 teats on Jacobs. It was thought that if a person had an extra nipple, that this was a sign that they were a witch. Why? Well, it was believed that the extra nipple or teat was from when the devil or some demons sucked the witch's blood as a form of nourishment. It was said that Jacob Sr. had 3 of them. One in his mouth, one on his right shoulder blade, and one on his hip. Now, they weren't actually nipples though, it was just a 1/4 inch long fleshy thing protruding from his skin with a sharp point. They proceeded to stick pins in each of them to see what would happen. This was called the witch pricker. Apparently, if you are pricked and you don't have a reaction to getting pricked and you don't bleed, then you are a witch. Well, when they pricked each teat, Jacobs never reacted to it and he didn't even bleed. So he was found guilty on August 5th, 1692 and was sentenced to be hanged along with the other witches. And in our number 1 spot we have Elspeth Rioch. Elspeth Rioch was an alleged witch in Scotland during the early 1600s. When she was 12 years old, she claimed that she was approached by 2 men. One was dressed in all black, the other in green tartan. The man in green told her that if she followed his instructions, that she would be able to obtain magical powers. He told her to boil an egg and use the condensation from cooking the egg and take it and rub it on her eyes with unwashed hands. Sounds like an eye infection to me. He said that this would give her the powers to see and know everything that she wanted. So she followed his instructions and bam, it actually worked. So now I kind of want to go home and try it. I don't know, maybe it will work. And she actually developed clairvoyant skills. When Elspeth was older, she was visited again by the men. This time it was only the man in black. He showed up in her room one night. He told her that he was neither dead nor alive, but trapped between heaven and earth. He also told her that to maintain her magic skills, she needed to act dumb. That way, no one would suspect a thing. They'd be like, she's not a witch, no, she's way too dumb to be one. Well, eventually she was caught. In fact, she got in way more trouble because of her acting dumb. They were all like, she's fully a witch, she tried to trick us, let's kill her. At her trial in March of 1616, she confessed to using her clairvoyant powers to spy on people, and she would also use magical spells to cure illnesses. Furthermore, when they inspected her body, they found a witch's mark. She had what appeared to be a scar in the shape of bite marks on her shoulder. Later she confessed that she was bit by the devil and that was the mark that he left. She was charged with witchcraft and deceiving locals by pretending she was mute. In the end, she was executed by strangulation before having her body burned. Starting off this countdown, we have Julia Brown. Julia Brown was a well-known voodoo practitioner and witch in her small town in Louisiana. People knew her for her charms and her curses, as well as the creepy songs that she would sing on her porch with her guitar. In her community, people would come to her and she would perform a number of different rituals for them. That was until people started to take advantage of her, so she started to get back at them. When they came to her, she would scare them by telling them predictions like they're gonna die soon or bad things were coming for them. Then the locals were like, "Hey, what's going on with her?" Close to her death, Julia started to act strange. She would constantly sing songs about her death and how she would get revenge on the town. One song that she would sing goes as so: "When I die, I take the whole town with me. When I die, I take the whole town." Not a very cheery and upbeat song if you ask me. In fact, no one knew what she was talking about until the day that she passed away. On September 29, 1952, Julia passed away. On that day, the town came together for her funeral. Well, as they were lowering her casket into the ground, rain came down hard. This rain later turned into a disastrous hurricane that wiped out the entire town. So it's believed that before she left, she put a curse on the town, which is what she meant by "when I die, I'm taking the whole town with me." Over the years, a number of people have attempted to rebuild the town, but every time they do, it ends up getting destroyed again. Maybe her curse is real then. In our 4th spot today, we have Gerald Gardner. Gerald Gardner is often called the father of modern witchcraft, and that's due to the fact that he founded Wicca. Although technically he learned it from a group of people and then went on to just write about it, so they gave him credit for it. But anyways, basically back in 1939 he said that one night he encountered a group of women who claimed to be witches. They stripped him of his clothes and put him in the middle of a ceremonial circle. The circle was lined with naked women, and they showed him their ways. From there, he learned briefly about Wicca and thought, hey, this is great, let's preserve this and make sure that everyone knows about it. In 1954, he actually created a book titled Witchcraft Today that teaches others how to embrace Wicca fully. He then went on and became obsessed with the occult. In fact, it's believed that a number of Wiccans and pagans were saved partly because of him. They could come out and be like, yeah, I'm a witch, without fear of being hanged or burned alive. To this day, he's one of the most relevant witches in history, but also one of the more controversial ones. In our third spot today, we have Mother Shipton. Mother Shipton, otherwise known as Ursula Sonthiel, was born in 1488 England. Legend has it that she was born during a massive thunderstorm and her mother gave birth to her in a cave. Her mother was only 15 at the time and was stuck raising Ursula in that cave by herself. That was until the monastery took her mother in and a local family took Ursula in. Eventually her mom was taken to a nunnery and they never saw each other again. Growing up, Ursula had a hard time fitting in. She had a large crooked nose, her back had a bend in it, and her legs were twisted. So right off the bat, people were like, yeah, she's a witch, just because of her appearance. In fact, people would bully her and call her hag face. Others believed her father was the devil. It didn't help that her mom refused to tell anyone who the father of her child was. So people were like, yeah, for sure, her father's the devil. Not only that, she would spend a lot of time by the cave that she was born in. Now, how did she get the name Mother Shipton? Well, eventually she went on to marry a man named Tobias Shipton, and she took his last name. She eventually did partake in witchcraft and would make magical remedies for the sick. So people called her Mother Shipton because she was like a mother to all. At one point in her life, she became psychic and could see into the future. Soon after, she was called the Narrenborough Witch. She made a living off of predicting and sharing the future with others. Moving on to number 2, we have Isabelle Godie. Isabelle Godie was a Scottish woman from Aldern, a village near the Scottish Highlands. She is well known in history because in 1662 she confessed to witchcraft and may have been executed. We actually don't know because there's no official record of it, so it's a mystery. Basically, during that time, if you were thought to be a witch, they would torture you until you admitted to being one, even if you weren't actually one. Well, Isabelle's case sparked a lot of interest because she admitted to being a witch willingly without torture or anything. And she went into great detail on everything that she was doing. She gave 4 separate confessions given over a 6-week period. For example, she said she made a pact with the devil and had been engaging in intercourse with him. She also said that she was part of a coven and would cast spells on the community. She claimed she put a curse on some male authority figures who she felt victimized by. She also cursed her landlord for being a pervert and put one on the local church minister. Lastly, she also admitted that she had the ability to turn into animals and that she was interacting with fairies. Over the centuries, a number of people have analyzed Isabelle and have come up with some explanations for her actions. One is that she suffered from psychosis or hallucinations, whereas others think it was a ploy to get maybe a more lenient sentence. But of course, you still have the people who believe that she was an actual witch and did everything that she admitted to doing. And in our number 1 spot today, we have La Voisin. Catherine Montvoisin, or La Voisin, was a witch that lived in France in the mid-1600s. Her witchcraft mainly comprised of mixing and creating potions, poisons, and medicines. She also would tell people their fortunes and would hold black masses where people could come and make contact with the devil through her. It started off with her just providing palm readings and advice for people, but then she realized that her clients were mainly women who were coming to her with spousal problems. A number of them wanted their husband dead, so she started creating the potions to help them kill their husbands and gain fortune. Then things started to get darker and darker. She began practicing dark magic and witchcraft. This involved her leading a number of satanic rituals in the catacombs under her home. One time she even spilt the blood of an innocent victim as a sacrifice for the devil. Eventually, Catherine was arrested for practicing witchcraft and for being involved in a number of murders. She was publicly burned at the stake in 1680.
Starting off this countdown, we have Tituba. Tituba is a pretty famous name when it comes to the Salem witch trials because she was the first woman to be accused of practicing witchcraft. So Tituba was a young slave who was under the order of a man named Samuel Parris. She was in charge of looking after his daughter and niece, among other things. Then in the early 1690s, several young girls all over town began acting strange, his daughter and niece included. The girls would contort their bodies, bark like dogs, and babble and cry hysterically, almost as if they were possessed. They also would complain of bruises and pinch marks appearing randomly on their body. So immediately, people thought that they had been cursed by a witch. When she was put in front of a court, at first she denied any involvement. But eventually she admitted to practicing witchcraft. She claimed that the devil came to her and bid her to serve him. She went on to tell this elaborate tale about seeing strange animals, like a hairy creature that walked on two legs with wings and a head like a woman. She also talked about a red cat and how she would ride on sticks, and was told by the devil to pinch these young girls. She also claimed that a big black dog came to her and told her to hurt the girls. Her testimony shocked and scared a lot of people, and we don't know if what she said was true or if she was just messing with the people in the court, playing into the whole witch stereotype, or if she really was practicing witchcraft and made a deal with the devil. In the end, she was sent to prison for a year. In 1693, some mysterious unknown individual freed her from jail, and after that, no one heard from her. In our fourth spot today, we have Agnes Samson. In the early 1590s, King James VI of Scotland started to fear witches. He blamed that witches could cast spells on Mother Nature and conjure up terrible storms. Well, as King James and his wife were sailing back to Scotland, they encountered two very dangerous storms. Immediately, he was like, "It was the witches, they're out to get me!" And then he was determined to get them. So he started a witch hunt. Of the 70 people accused of being witches, one of them was named Agnes Samson. She was a healer and midwife, but because she had these healing powers, people automatically assumed that she was an evil witch. In fact, growing up, her father taught her about the black arts. She also apparently could give predictions. So yes, she was a witch, but she was not an evil one. Well, eventually she was accused by a woman named Gilles Duncan. Basically, under torture, she confessed to being a witch and then gave the names of other witches. That's when Samson's name was brought up. She was then tortured as well, and her body was shaved and revealed a witch's mark. In the end, under torture, she confessed to being allies with Satan and said that she conspired to kill the king. She was later burned to death. Now it's said that the ghost of Agnes haunts the Palace of Holy Roadhouse. A number of people have seen her roaming around naked after she was stripped and tortured. Moving on to number 3, we have Malin Matsdotter. In July of 1676, Swedish widow Malin Matsdotter was reported for being a witch. She was reported by her own daughters. They claimed that their mom would abduct a number of children and use them for a number of dark rituals. She was accused during the largest witch trial in Swedish history, the Great Noise. Now, was Malin actually a witch, or were her daughters just looking to get rid of her? Well, sadly, we don't know for sure. She may have indeed been practicing witchcraft, but she wasn't going around abducting kids. That part was never proven. Anyways, when she was put in front of the court, she always maintained her innocence. Her partner, on the other hand, Anna Simon's daughter Hack, was also accused of being a witch and apologized for her wrongdoings. These two women were the last victims executed for being witches. Anna was decapitated, but for Malin, well, they decided to burn her at the stake. She was the only witch in Swedish history to have been burned alive. Rumor has it that just before she was burned alive, she cursed both her daughters for eternity and gave them over to the devil. When the flames covered her body, apparently she did not scream, nor did she appear to be in pain. For everyone watching, this was further proof that she was in fact a witch. In our second spot today, we have Dion Fortune. Dion Fortune, born Violet Mary Firth, was a psychiatrist, author, occultist, and witch. For Fortune, it all started at the young age of 4. That's when she claimed she started receiving visions. Apparently, the visions were of her being a priestess in her past life. Then at the age of 20, she suffered a mental breakdown as a result of these psychic attacks, as she called them. During her recovery, she found herself drawn to the occult. From there, she began writing a number of books on the occult and witchcraft. In 1924, she founded a fraternity for people interested in the craft. It was called the Fraternity of Inner Light. In the fraternity, they engaged in a number of different practices and rituals. One was the initiation ritual, where the candidate was introduced to magic and witchcraft. The second was evocation, in which people would learn to harness the powers of witchcraft. Furthermore, Fortune was known for her involvement in the magical Battle of Britain. Basically, a number of British occultists joined together to help during World War II by using their magic. Shortly after the war ended, Fortune passed away. It's believed that her great effort in this battle caused her health to weaken and weaken. Nowadays, her influence is still strong for practitioners in the Wicca/witchcraft movement. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Marie Laveau. Although Marie Laveau described herself as a voodoo priestess, a number of people just referred to her as a witch. So Marie lived in New Orleans from 1794 to 1881, but not a lot is known about her life. What we do know is that she turned heads on the streets. Some were terrified of her, others basically bowed down to her. So it's said that the magic she practiced combined Catholic and African spiritual traditions. In fact, she was frequently called upon to help others. She would visit the sick in prisons, and at one point, the city called upon her for help with the yellow fever epidemic of the 1850s. On top of it all, she owned a large snake that she named Zombie, named after an African god. In fact, many believed that this snake harnessed magical powers itself. Her most well-known case was when she was called to work on a murder trial of a young man. The man's father came to Marie and promised her anything if she just saved his son. The odds were not in his favor. Everyone for sure thought that the verdict was going to be guilty, but Marie secretly placed several charms throughout the courtroom. And guess what? In the end, the man was found not guilty. That's pretty freaky. After Marie's death, her gravesite was frequently vandalized, but not for what you think. That's because legend goes if you draw an X on her gravestone, Marie's spirit will grant you whatever you want. So you had to draw an X on her tomb, then turn around 3 times, knock on her tomb, and then you have to yell out your wish. If in the end the wish comes true, you have to come back, circle the X, and then leave Marie an offering. Here's another legend surrounding Miss Laveau. There's apparently a haunted image of her hanging in New Orleans' historic voodoo museum. Some people say that they can feel Marie's cold eyes watching them as they're looking at this painting. Others say that once you see this image, then Marie will haunt you and even show up in your dreams. In fact, tour guides say that whoever wishes to see this painting must go by themselves, because the tour guides refuse to see this painting themselves. It's pretty freaky if you ask me.
Starting off this countdown, we have Gilles Garnier. Now, not only was this guy a witch, but he actually used his witchy powers to conjure up a potion that would transform him into a werewolf whenever he so pleased. That's right, he was a witch and a werewolf. In October of 1572 France, that's when Garnier killed his first victim as a werewolf. He grabbed the poor girl and dragged her into a vineyard. He then proceeded to tear the flesh off of her bones with his teeth and eat it. But he was still not satisfied after, so he went and ate another victim. He struck again the following month. He took on his werewolf form and attacked a man and ate his stomach. This kept going on and on until someone caught him. Well, actually, they didn't really know it was him at first, but they claimed that they saw some weird man-like beast crouching over and eating one of the victims. That's when the authorities were like, oh shit, there's a werewolf on the loose, and then they were out looking for this weird werewolf man. While they were out looking for him, people kept going missing like crazy, and eventually he was caught. One evening, a group of workers were traveling across towns when they spotted the werewolf man. As they got closer, they saw it was Garnier and obviously reported his ass to the authorities. At trial, he confessed to having stalked and murdered at least 4 individuals, but the number was indeed higher. In the end, he was found guilty of witchcraft and lycanthropy, and he was burned at the stake. Moving on to number 4, we have Lassis Bergita. Lassis Bergita was an alleged Swedish witch back in the 1500s. In fact, she was the first woman executed for witchcraft in Sweden. Story goes that one night her and 2 men met up at a churchyard cemetery with plans to resurrect people from the dead using their witchy powers. When they arrived at the church, Lassis used her powers to open the church doors. This involved her circling the place 3 times and then blowing into the keyhole. Magically it opened for them and they entered. While in the church, they were looking for a stole. You know, the scarf type pieces of cloth that are worn by priests? That was needed in order to complete the ritual. After finally finding it, she renounced God and swore herself to the devil. Somehow, people found out that the 3 had attempted to resurrect the dead and reported them. Lassis was decapitated for being a witch, whereas the other 2 men were just fined. That's rough, man. That's rough. I'm also glad that their plan to bring back the dead didn't work. Like, imagine they would have to fight off witches and then zombies. Crazy. Coming in at number 3, we have Agnes Waterhouse. Agnes Waterhouse, otherwise known as Mother Waterhouse, was the first woman in England to be executed for witchcraft. Agnes confessed to being a witch and having a familiar named Satan, which was her cat. Later on, the cat apparently took the form of a toad. The familiar originally belonged to her friend and fellow witch Elizabeth Frances, but was later passed along to her. Furthermore, apparently Agnes would use her sorcery for evil. In 1566, she used her witchcraft to try and cause illness to a man named William Fine, and he was not so fine. After that, she used her powers to kill her enemies' livestock and as well as cause them illness. And lastly, she also tried to kill her husband using her powers. In fact, at her trial, one of her neighbors, a 12-year-old girl named Agnes Brown, came forward and testified against her. She claimed that she was visited by a demon dog under the control of Agnes Waterhouse. So according to the girl, one day she was visited by this demon that looked like a black dog with a face of an ape with a short tail, a set of horns, and a silver whistle around its neck. The demon dog appeared at her home and asked for some butter. She refused, and apparently later that day he returned with a knife and threatened to kill her. She said that he was going to thrust his knife in her heart and kill her. When the girl bravely asked to send him, the dog just turned his head toward Waterhouse's home. On July 29, 1566, Agnes Waterhouse was executed. Before doing so, she repented and begged God for forgiveness. She also did admit that she was sending her familiar to hurt and damage her neighbor's goods. But her neighbor, a tailor named Wardall, had such strong faith that the familiar was unable to mess with him. In the end, Agnes was hanged for her crimes. Moving on at number 2, we have Elizabeth Frances. So Elizabeth Frances was friends with Agnes Waterhouse. Some even say that they were sisters. I don't know. But she was accused around the same time that Agnes was. She was the original owner of Satan, the white spotted cat, and her familiar. According to Frances, she received the cat from her grandmother, who was also a witch. Her grandmother, in fact, was the person who taught her all about witchcraft when she was only 12 years old. According to Elizabeth, her cat would speak to her in a strange hollow voice and also would do anything in exchange for a drop of blood, which is why they could get him to do all of their dark bidding for them. During trial, Elizabeth confessed to stealing sheep and killing a number of people, including a man named Andrew Biles. Andrew refused to marry Elizabeth after she became pregnant with his child, so she killed him. Later on, her familiar told her to make a certain concoction of herbs and to drink it, and that would terminate her pregnancy. She did, and it worked. Not only that, but when Frances finally married, she got her familiar to kill her husband and her daughter. Agnes also confessed to using her powers and familiar to kill one of her own pigs to see, what it could do. And then she also killed her neighbor's cows and geese after they got in an argument. She got in an argument with the neighbor, not with the cows and geese, thought I should clarify. As I said before, the cat eventually turned to a toad on its own. So Frances was the first witch to be accused, and then she was the one who told everyone about Agnes in order to get a lighter sentence. So Elizabeth wasn't killed right off the bat. But 13 years later, she was accused again, and that's when she was killed for witchcraft. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Laurie Cabot. The story of Laurie Cabot is one that still blows my mind to this day. So Laurie is the high priestess of the Salem Coven. She is well known among modern day witches. Now, Laurie would only ever use her powers for good and to help people. In fact, she was psychic, and she would use her psychic abilities in order to help police solve a number of crimes. The first time being during the disappearance and death of Martha Brailsford. So back in 1991, 2 people from Salem were reported missing. That was Martha Brailsford and her neighbor Tom Mamoni. Eventually, Tom returned home and said that the 2 were sailing when Martha fell off the boat after being hit by a rogue wave. So police began searching the bay for Martha, but they were unsuccessful. That's when one of the investigators who knew about Laurie and her abilities reached out to her for her help. Using just Martha's name, location, and birth, she was able to tune in and locate her. Laurie then said she got visions of Tom trying to make advances on Martha, but Martha was not into it. When she rejected him, he dragged her to the side of the boat and struck her head. He then put weights on her hips and attached an anchor to her feet and tossed her overboard. She even saw exactly where in the water Martha was. And guess what? She was right about all of that. A local fisherman ended up finding her body in the location that Laurie had said. And Martha did indeed have anchors and weights attached to her body. When Martha's body was located, Tom fled, and so Laurie was once again asked for help, but this time locating Tom. She once again tuned in and got a vision of Tom in a cabin, and got a vibe he was on his way to cross into Canada. Not only that, but Laurie performed a binding spell on Tom to make sure he would do something stupid so that he would get caught. Well, 3 days later, police found the cabin Tom was staying in, and it was in a small town near the Canadian border. They found the cabin because Tom made a stupid mistake. He parked his car near the cabin and he left the lights on. Neighbors called the cops because they didn't recognize the car and they knew the neighbors were out of town. Isn't that crazy? Round of applause for Laurie.
Number 5. Julie Brown. Our first witch today on the list of which witch is Julie Brown, legendary voodoo priestess of the swamps. New Orleans is filled to bursting with two things: the most wondrous advancements in soul food and gumbo technology on the planet, and ghost stories. There's a whole lot of voodoo to go around in Louisiana, and in Manchac they say there's the ghost of an old voodoo priestess named Julie Brown. The story of Julie Brown is an unnerving one. I would certainly hope so, otherwise it wouldn't be on this list. She was said to be reclusive, would sit on the porch of her swamp shack and spend the day cackling, predicting the demise of nearby towns and its residents, singing twisted songs about her death and the apocalypse and the end of days. Despite the fact that she was a kooky old lady singing songs about the apocalypse on her front steps, locals actually feared her and treated her as an oracle and a prophet, and were very nervous of wronging her just in case she placed a hex on them, which, you know, is reasonable. You should always treat everyone you meet with kindness just in case they turn out to be a witch who can hex you. The prediction she's most known for, besides one bizarre correct prediction about the 1994 Super Bowl Cowboys at Bills game, was her threatening prediction in 1915, where Julie Brown would cackle over and over and over that she was going to die and take everyone with her. She chanted this again and again until her death. On her funeral, a hurricane hit the town, decimating 3 villages and taking countless lives. Julie is said to be buried in the swamp, and locals believe it was her spirit that caused the hurricane. And if you happen to be passing through Manchac, just pay your respects to Miss Julie Brown. Like I said, you never know what kind of secrets somebody has. And if you're looking for more stories about witches, or really any kind of urban legend, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some. I'm not kidding. If you can think it up, there's pretty good odds we've done 2 to 3 videos on it. We got something scary for everything under the sun and above it. So hit subscribe. Please make sure you hit that little bell so you don't miss a single scream, but do that after this video because I got 4 more witch stories coming up for you right now. And wouldn't you know it, the next one's about a bell. Number 4, the Bell Witch. In the 1800s, a farmer going by the name of John Bell moved his family to picturesque Adams, Tennessee, onto a beautiful 300-acre farm, little slice of American pie. Bell quickly became a figurehead of the community, respected by many, and became a local leader at the town church. For the Bell family, things were the brightest they've ever been. They were living the dream and ringing in good fortune. I was trying to make a Bell pun work there. There's probably a better one. Things wouldn't be good for long, and they'd find themselves in a nightmare shortly. By 1817, strange, inexplicable things started to occur all around the farmstead. John Bell found a strange animal on the farmstead, a mutant hybrid that resembled a grotesque mix between a dog and a rabbit. I know that sounds like it would be cute, but I think if you get the wrong parts of both, that's just going to turn out to be a very, very ugly animal. I think dog, rabbit ears, pretty cute. Maybe like dog, rabbit face, dog, rabbit body. I don't know. Mess. Anyway, it was a disgusting thing. The younger members of the Bell family would wake up covered in red scratches all over their bodies at all hours of the day. The family would hear faint whispering and singing that sounded like an old woman singing hymns. Most tragic is the Bells found a mysterious vial of liquid inside their home that no one could explain or understand. Nervous about what it was, the Bells offered the mystery liquid to their cat, which passed almost immediately. Rest in peace, Bell cat, taken too soon, undeservedly. You didn't deserve to be an experiment for them. For 3 long years, the Bell family was tormented by a mysterious entity that would later become known as the Bell Witch, after the mysterious old woman's humming and singing. In 1820, John Bell quickly grew extremely ill, quickly descending in his health, and would pass away later. At his funeral, the mourners complained they could all hear the laughing of an old woman, mocking and singing the fate of the late John Bell. The farm became a haunted attraction, where it still is to this day, and it even caught the attention of President Andrew Jackson, who in 1819, a year before Mr. Bell's passing, visited to see if legends of the witch were real. Allegedly. As soon as his carriage arrived at the property, the horses refused to budge anymore. The animals can always tell. Number 3, the Black Hag. Our next witch probably has the most impressive title out of any of them, the Black Hag. That is such a cool name for a witch to have. She resides in a church called, oh god. Let me try this. The Monastery oh. What, you want to throw that on screen for me? Monastery, how am I supposed to say that? This is the witch's curse. I don't even know about any witchy stuff she does. She tries to get you to say this evil word and then it curses your family. I'm getting a note over here. It says that it's also called the Abbey of the Black Hag. Well, that's what we're going with. We're not calling it that other thing. I'm not doing that. The Black Abbey of the Hag, which as far as I know is the only name this church has ever gone by, was built in 1298. Wow, it's an old church. And was one of the few well-known medieval convents in old Ireland. The remains of the abbey still stand today in a secluded valley, making an already mysterious and supernatural place just that much more atmospheric. The place is called the Abbey of the Black Hag, for God's sakes. You don't name a place that unless it's pretty haunted. Sounds like it's straight out of Dishonored. And while I've got you here, Dishonored 3, when's that happening? Now, it's believed that the last abbess, which is a horrible word, in charge of the abbey practiced witchcraft, and in the scary way. She brought death, misfortune to the surrounding areas. Pope Martin V condemned the abbey. He was not down for witches at all. Catholic Church don't play with witches. The accused witch left to live out in the damp, deserted abbey by herself, which she probably loved because that sounds scary. Over time, her skin blackened, her hair furled, and her soul twisted, leading to the place being named the Abbey of the Black Hag. And if you can believe this, there's actually more to this story. The Count and Countess of Desmond once called the abbey home when attempting to flee their attackers, where the Countess was fatally struck by an arrow and buried by her husband, but it would not be the end of the Countess. Sightings of a ghostly figure around the ruins of the abbey were common, eventually leading to someone digging up worn out finger bones. And it's said now that a woman's panicked shrieking can be heard in the early hours around the abbey. Number 2, the Blair Witch. Perhaps one of the most pervasive witches in pop culture after the Wicked Witch of the West, the Scourge of Maryland, the Blair Witch. Perhaps you saw the very successful 1999 documentary regarding her legend, or maybe you saw one of the 2 middling sequels. According to legends, she haunts the Black Hills forest near the town of Burkittsville, Maryland. The local folklore states that in the 18th century, a woman named Ellie Kedward was accused of practicing witchcraft. She was chased and exiled out of the township of Blair and condemned to live in the woods, hence the Blair Witch. It's believed that she died out in the surrounding forests in the harsh winter of 1785, but it's also said that she placed a curse on the town moments before her death, vowing to seek revenge on the townspeople and their descendants for generations. And not to split hairs here, but that does actually kind of sound like she was a witch. I'm not saying it was justified in exiling a woman out of her town, just that placing a hex on a town definitely sounds like witchcraft, and I can understand where they were coming from. I'm just trying to understand the scenario, okay? I'm divorced from it. I'm not part of it. I'm just trying to understand it. From here, the legends of Kedward grew into the larger-than-life figure, the Blair Witch. Various disturbing events were attributed to the Blair Witch. Mysterious disappearances, people being lured away into the woods, supernatural phenomena, camera crews disappearing in forests, reports of finding strange hex bags in the surrounding woods filled with strange runes and symbols and remnants of people, hair, teeth, for her to perform wicked rituals. Now, it goes without saying, unless you firmly believed the marketing campaign of the 1999 film, the Blair Witch Project is obviously a movie. While they say it's based on the real story of Ellie Kenward, there is no record of a Blair Township ever having existed. Almost certainly, the Blair Witch's story is inspired in large swaths by the Bell Witch, who we talked about earlier. Although in a kind of unique case, back in the day when the Blair Witch did come out, its marketing was so effective, and in this sort of like pre-early internet area, there were several people who did think it was real. It was a cast of completely unknown actors by a team no one had ever heard of. And on some level, I don't know, maybe to get esoteric with it, what makes an urban legend real? Just us believing in it, right? Do you believe the other 4 stories I've told you more? They're no less fictional. My only source was the internet for all of those. So, I'm just saying, open mind. Number 1, La Bruja de Cachiche. And our final witch for today is going to be La Bruja de Cachiche, a well-known urban legend from Peru, specifically from the coastal town of Cachiche near the city of Ica. The legend revolves around a reputed witch who lived during the colonial era. According to legend, La Bruja de Cachiche was an enigmatic woman with exceptional powers and knowledge of witchcraft. She was believed to possess both healing abilities and the abilities to cast curses. She multi-specced. It was said that she used various herbs, potions, and rituals to perform her magic. Now, one of the most interesting aspects of this legend is this belief that La Bruja de Cachiche had a physical deformity, specifically a hunchback. And if there's one thing we love in an urban legend, it's a bit of a physical deformity. It makes it that much more believable and scary. Because someone conventionally unattractive is way scarier than not. Don't blame me, blame our Western views on beauty. I didn't write them, I just perpetuate them. Over time, the legend of La Bruja de Cachiche became intertwined with the history and culture of the town of Cachiche. Local residents and visitors began associating certain landmarks and natural phenomena with their presence. For example, there's a famous gnarled and twisted tree called the Witch's Tree that is said to have been her gathering place. Today, Cachiche has embraced the legend of La Bruja de Cachiche as part of its heritage. The town has a statue of the witch, and there are various festivals and events dedicated to her, and I guarantee you no party goes even half as hard as a party celebrating a local witch. Oh my god, imagine the cauldron stew. The legend has also become a popular tourist attraction, drawing visitors who are interested in the occult, folklore, and statues.
Coming in at number 5, we have Alice Keitler. Dame Alice Keitler was the first recorded person condemned for witchcraft in Ireland. Alice was born in the county of Kilkenny in Ireland in 1263 and had been married a total of 4 times. In 1302, Alice and her second husband were accused of killing her first husband, but due to her vast wealth and involvement in money lending, these accusations were dropped. When her fourth husband John Lepar fell ill in 1324, he expressed the suspicion that he was being poisoned by his wife. After his death, the children of John and Alice's past husbands accused her of using poison and sorcery. Along with these allegations, she was also accused of denying the faith of Christ and the church, cutting up animals to sacrifice to demons at crossroads, holding secret nocturnal meetings in churches to perform black magic and undermined and overpowered the church, using sorcery and potions to control Christians, the murder of her past husband, and the possession of Robin Artisan, a lesser demon of Satan. Richard de la Drade, the Bishop of Ossory, sought to uphold the laws of the church and morality, so when the case of Alice Keitler came across him, he began an even larger project of addressing witchcraft. Richard made many attempts to have Alice arrested due to the many allegations against her and her use of witchcraft and black magic, but because of having powerful friends in the delay of the trial, Alice was able to flee, and it's believed that she fled to England but could never be found and arrested. Some of the people who were said to be working with Alice were captured and stood trial. One of them being one of her servants, Petronilla de Mep, who confessed to working with Alice in such things like committing heresy, sacrificing to demons, making love and hate potions to corrupt the church, engaging in affair with a demon and murdering her past husband. Alice was dark and manipulated many people around her to follow her and participate in witchcraft, and to this day it's not confirmed where she fled, but when she did, she was never seen again. In at number 4 we have Agnes Samson. Agnes Samson was a Scottish healer and a witch. She was involved in the North Berwick witch trials in the later part of the 16th century. Agnes lived in East Lothian, Scotland, and was considered to have healing powers and worked as a midwife. In the summer of 1590, King James VI was on a voyage
voyage from Denmark to Copenhagen after marrying Anne of Denmark, and on their way home a storm arose, and this made James believe the storm wasn't a coincidence. He believed that many people had unusual abilities and was greatly perplexed at the idea of witchcraft and black magic. So he began a witch hunt in Denmark, which was where the Copenhagen witch trials were started by the Danish Admiral Peter Munk by King James's request. By the autumn of 1590, Scotland was aflame with witch hunts, and many of those sent to trial were questioned by the king himself. Agnes was accused of being a witch by Gilles Duncan and was arrested along with others, and she was questioned heavily about her role in the storm raising. Agnes eventually confessed, and her body was shaved to reveal a witch's mark. Agnes Samson had made a charm that she was able to raise a storm and change the winds. She confessed to causing a storm that drowned Jane Kennedy in September of 1589, when ferry boats collided during a sudden storm started by Agnes. The same charm raised the storm and weather effects that threatened the king on his return voyage from Denmark in 1590. King James actually was the one to interview Agnes and was very convinced of her guilt. She was convicted of witchcraft and was sent to be executed. She had been taken to a scaffold on Castle Hill, where she was strangled and then burnt at the stake in January of 1591. It is believed and seen by many locals that the naked ghost of a bold Agnes is said to roam in the palace of Holyrood House, haunting the people there. Coming in at number 3, we have Merga Bien. Merga Bien was a German woman convicted of witchcraft and perhaps the most famous of the victims in the Fulda witch trials in 1603 to 1605. Merga was born in the city of Fulda, and she'd been married a total of 3 times and was the heiress of her first 2 husbands. In 1588, she had married her final husband, Lassis Bergita, and moved to the city, but eventually returned after an apparent conflict with her husband's employer. At the time, Prince Abbot Balthasar von Dernbach, who had returned to power in 1602 after a long exile, ordered an immediate investigation of witchcraft in the city, after multiple reports and sightings. While in power, there were over 200 people who were executed for witchcraft in witch trials that lasted until his death in 1605. In March of 1603, the investigations resulted in the first wave of arrests in the city. On June 19th, Marga was arrested and put into jail after signs of being involved with the devil and having supernatural abilities. Her current husband pointed out she was pregnant, but still that did not matter. It was actually believed that her current pregnancy was the result of intercourse with the devil himself. While in jail, she confessed to the murder of her second husband and her children with him and one of the member of her husband's employers, and that she had taken part in the Sabbath of Satan. Bien was convicted of witchcraft soon after her confession when it was burnt alive at the stake in Fulda in late 1603, and to this day she is still known as being one of the most dominant witches in Germany. In at number 2, we have Malin Matsdotter. Malin Matsdotter was a Swedish witch from 1613 to 1676. She is known as one of the few people in Sweden confirmed to have been executed by burning for witchcraft, and the only one to be executed by this method during the famous witch hunt known as the Great Noise in Sweden during 1668 to 1676, which had ended with her execution. Since 1668, a national witch hunt raged throughout Sweden ever since the accusation of Marit Jonsdotter, resulting in the establishment of witch commissions around the nation and execution of around 280 people. The accused showed signs of being witches, along with abducting children to the witches' Sabbath of Satan in Blockula. Malin Matsdotter was among the accused, and not much is known about her background, but what we do know is that she had been married a couple of times and had 2 daughters with her first husband, Eric Nilsson. She was also known to work as a midwife and was actually hired by a woman named Anna Zippel, who actually accused of witchcraft as well and had been executed for being a witch. It's later found that Anna taught Malin the ways of witchcraft and sorcery. In 1676, Malin was reported for witchcraft by her 19-year-old daughter, Maria. Malin was brought to trial for the accusation as her daughter Maria testified against her mother, stating that she had taken her and several other children to Satan in Blockula, and that Satan himself, known to the children as the Mean One, appeared in court with horns standing next to her mother, holding her skirt, and whispered in her ear never to confess. Malin was ordered by the court to fall on her knees and pray, or be able to confess, but she didn't obey. Along with Maria, 10-year-old and 7-year-old both testified to have been abducted by Malin to Blockula to see Satan. A woman named Gertrude also testified against Malin, stating that she had abducted her family to Satan 16 times and even another 14 times while she was in prison. Also, she had seen her family endure fits while being supernaturally beaten by Malin from prison. Malin's firm denial of these crimes was seen as a sign that the devil assisted the witch to withstand interrogations. Finally, in July of 1676, Malin was found guilty and sentenced to be executed. And finally, in at number 1, we have the Salem Witches. The most well-known cases of witches in history, and you may have heard of them, are the witches from Salem. The Salem witch trials of 1692 are still widely talked about today. Witchcraft scared a lot of people throughout history. The thought The thought of people possessing supernatural powers was widely talked about, and many people were accused and labelled as witches. The Salem witch trials in particular were a series of hearings and prosecutions of people who were accused of witchcraft in colonial Massachusetts between February 1692 and May 1693. More than 200 people were accused of possessing such abilities. A total of 30 people were found guilty, and 19 of them were executed by hanging. Among the 19 killed were 14 women and 5 men. Also, of the 200 accused, many were sent to jail, and at least 5 of them died there. Arrests were made in numerous other towns beyond Salem, like in Andover and Topsfield. The trials for the so-called capital crime were conducted by the Court of Oyer and Terminer in 1692, and by a Superior Court of Judicature in 1693. Both were held in Salem, where the mass hangings took place. This was the deadliest witch hunt in the history of colonial North America. Only 14 women and 2 men had been executed in Massachusetts and Connecticut during the 17th century who had been accused of witchcraft. Among the accused were Elizabeth Hubbard and also Dorothy Good, who were also accused of witchcraft. In February of 1692, Betty Parris and her cousin Abigail Williams, who were the daughter and niece of a respected Reverend Samuel Parris, started acting strangely, and would have fits described as beyond the power of epileptic fits or natural disease to affect by Minister John Hale. The girls screamed through things around the room, uttered strange sounds, crawled under furniture, and contorted themselves into odd positions according to eyewitness accounts. The girls also complained of being pinched and pricked with pins, but when they went to a doctor, he could find no physical evidence of any ailments on either girl. After the news of these odd behaviors started spreading around Salem, other young girls began experiencing similar behaviors. No one had any idea of where these strange behaviors were coming from, or why the girls were acting in such an odd way. Massachusetts was a very religious town back then, and these girls were acting as if an ungodly being was inside of them. And so they had been accused of witchcraft, and many historians debate on how many of these 200 accused were actual witches, but some definitely were, and they had brought fear to the people of Salem. Coming in at number 5, we have Circe. Circe was one of the most powerful sorceresses of Greek mythology, and she was the daughter of Hecate, and was also the cousin of Zeus, the king of Olympians. She was a goddess of warning and dark moon who came to the patroness of witchcraft. She was exiled onto an island where she learned the art of magic. Circe's magical abilities came from both potion making and spell casting. She quickly gained a reputation for trickery, being ill-tempered, and casting spells onto those who ridiculed and mocked her. Whoever disrespected her would be turned into an animal without the slightest effort on her behalf. It was her supernatural abilities that ultimately led to her exile on the remote island of Aiae. Said to be located off the southern coastline of Italy, about 100 kilometers from Rome, Circe was sentenced to this island for all of eternity as a punishment for practicing witchcraft onto Scylla. Circe had fallen in love with Flaubus, a sea god, who became infatuated with Scylla, so when Circe's advances and attempts at seduction failed miserably, she was put into a jealous rage. Circe then poisoned the water where Scylla bathed, and as a result, a hideous monster was born. When it was found out it was Circe, she was banished for the rest of her life from her immortal home and family. When on the island, she was found by Odysseus, who was on a route traveling home with his men. They eventually became lovers, even though Circe killed Odysseus's men with her powers. Some say she used her powers to tempt and seduce Odysseus to stay on the island with her, and became her lover. Since the days of ancient Greece, Circe's name has been used to describe witchcraft, seduction, and deception. She's been depicted in paintings over the years, tempting Odysseus, casting spells over his men, and practicing her dark arts to lure men and punish them, along with turning her enemies into hideous animal-like creatures. In at number 4, we have Morgan Le Fay. Morgan Le Fay was a powerful enchantress in the 5th and 6th century, and she was related to King Arthur and was said to be his magical savior and protector. She was believed to be a goddess, a witch, and a sorceress. Morgan is skilled and learned what useful properties all herbs contain, so that she had the ability to cure the ailments and illnesses in the body. She also could shapeshift and was able to fly. When King Arthur was wounded in battle, he was brought to her chamber, and she was easily able to cure him. So after that, she was committed to his care from then on. Morgan also uses her healing skills with various of Arthur's knights of the Round Table, including Lancelot, who she fell in love with, and tried to seduce him, but he wasn't interested. Morgan showed Lancelot her incredible powers, and even though he had some powers as well, he was always defeated by the witch, and he described her as the most feared woman in the world. She soon is practicing more black magic and goes from helping and healing to becoming inherently evil. Morgan had the ability to communicate with the animals and sea creatures, ultimately giving her the name of the Empress of the Wilderness. When she began to demonstrate her magical powers, It's believed that Devil was her companion and even brought Lucifer himself, disguising him as a dragon to destroy her enemies. Morgan is seen by many as a malicious and cruel sorceress, and some say that she was working to take over her King Arthur's throne through her harmful magic, scheming, and the ability to manipulate men. Most of the time, Morgan's witchcraft corresponds with those of other people like Merlin's and the Lady of the Lakes, featuring the ability to shapeshift, illusion, and casting sleeping spells. In at number 3, Marie Laveau. Marie Laveau was born in early 1800, and she was a Louisiana practitioner of voodoo and is known as the Voodoo Witch of New Orleans. She was a dedicated practitioner of voodoo as well as being a healer and herbalist, and is one of the most well-known practitioners of the voodoo art and culture. Marie didn't take long to dominate the voodoo culture and society in New Orleans areas and being named the Queen of Voodoo. During her time practicing the art of voodoo, she would perform her services in such places like her home on St. Anne Street within Ghost Square and at Lake Pontchartrain, but it's unknown why she chose only these locations to perform her services. Many of her followers would call her for help with many things like family disputes, health, finances, and many other things. Once she was established in the art of voodoo, Marie opened her own beauty parlor where she worked as a hairdresser for wealthy families in New Orleans. It's believed that the occult part of her magic mixed Roman Catholic saints with African spirits and Native American spiritualism. Marie was also said to have owned a snake and named it Zombie after an African god. It is rumored that her magic was supported by a network of informants that she developed while working as a hairdresser in prominent white households. Marie excelled at obtaining inside information on her wealthy patrons by instilling fear in their servants, whom she either paid off or cured their mysterious ailments, and it was proven that she owned 7 slaves at one time. Marie was known to visit prisons to get death row prisoners ready for their execution, but she often would poison them herself after praying with them. The Queen of Voodoo died in 1881 at the age of 79, but she remains a legend today and is often referred to as one of the best to ever do it. Many famous musicians have written songs about or referring to Marie Laveau, and fun fact, in 1982 the famous punk rock band The Misfits were arrested and accused of attempting to exhume Marie from her grave after a local concert. In at 2 we have Moll Dyer. If you've seen the horror movie The Blair Witch Project, then you may already be familiar with the legend of the infamous Moll Dyer. She was a legendary 17th century resident of Leonardtown, Maryland, who was said to be a witch and accused of witchcraft and chased out of her home by the local townsfolk on a winter night. Her body was found a few days later, partially frozen to a large stone in the town of Allstate. It's believed that the rock itself is cursed and people that go near it will experience dizziness and fainting. The legendary rock is located on the grounds of Tudor Hall, where the Historical Society has its headquarters. It is said that her spirit still haunts the land to this day, looking for the men who forced her from her home before her death. The land near her cabin is said to be cursed, never able to grow crops, and an unusual number of lightning strikes have been recorded near her home. A road 3 miles south of Leonardtown was named after her and is now known as Moll Dyer Road, along with the creek which parallels the road being named Moll Dyer's Run. A man who was hunting along the run in 1970 reported seeing a very dense fog patch, cylindrical in shape, and the light stretched 8 inches in length and crossed the stream and went east, moving across the wind instead with the wind, and then it turned and went south, and it happened not once but twice. Moll Dyer was one of the historical figures that inspired the character in the Blair Witch Project, and she is the most well-known and famous witch in Maryland. The story of Moll has also been featured in the show American Supernatural in 2014, has inspired multiple books, and even in a Halloween ballet performance named The Legend of the Witch, performed from 1999 to 2006 in Maryland. In at number 1 we have Dion Fortune. Born Violet Mary Firth in 1890 in North Wales, Dion Fortune was a British occultist and author and said to be a modern-day witch. She wrote often about the occult in both fiction and both non-fictional stories. Dion possessed many abilities like contacting the dead, magical powers, and often had vision from her so-called past lives. Once she recalled having visions at the age of 4 of Atlantis, and she believed that was one of her past lives. In 1924 she founded the Fraternity of the Inner Light, a magical society dealing with religious philosophy and alternative realities. The fraternity's rituals were carried out under dim light, with Dion claiming bright light disperses etheric forces. A light would be placed on the altar while incense was burned, and the members would begin walking around the room chanting with the intent of building a psychic force. Next, the cosmic entities would be invoked, with the members believing that these entities would manifest in astral form and interact with the chosen ones. The magical principles on which her fraternity were based were adapted from the late 19th century Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, with other influences coming from Theosophy and Christian Science. The magical ceremonies performed performed by Dion's group were placed into two categories: initiation, in which the candidate was introduced to magical forces, and evocation, where these forces were manipulated for a given purpose. Dion died in 1924, leaving behind her magical society, which has survived to this day. Her novels in particular influenced on later occult and modern pagan groups such as Wicca. Author Ronald Hutton wrote a book called The Triumph of the Moon, A History of Modern Pagan Witchcraft, considers her the foremost female figure of British occultism. She is recognized by many as one of the most significant occultists and ceremonial magicians of the early 20th century.
Coming in at number 5, the Corwin Witch House. The Jonathan Corwin House in Salem, or simply known better as the Witch House, was the home of Judge Jonathan Corwin, 1640 to 1718, a prominent figure in the horrors that happened there, and is actually the only structure you can visit in Salem today that has direct ties to the Salem witch trials of 1692. Well, that might not be the case, because we got a couple of those coming up. Trust me, this place is riddled with ties to those witches. Corwin bought the house in 1675 and lived there for more than 40 years. The Witch House is a 350-year-old thick building with black painted timber, 2.5 stories tall, built to last, massive and looming. Located at 310 Essex Street in the historic district of Salem, the house stands in testimony to the witch trials, and it's believed that the Witch House was used by Jonathan Corwin and others to actually interrogate those accused of witchcraft. The Witch House remained with the Corwins, of course, until the mid-1800s, yet there wasn't many family around to liven it up. The Corwin Curse seems like a weird one, since all the Corwin's kids, 5 children, all perished young from separate complications within the house. And this is where it gets really weird. Not only is the place haunted to hell and back, with specters seen in the attic upstairs and loud voices, arguments heard in the empty house at night, 8 Corwin lives were lost to premature death in that house. All Corwins. Yeah, I'd say that makes for a pretty cursed home, alright? A family curse. Number 4, Proctor's Ledge. There are over 1,000 documents from Salem witch trials, yet none of the accounts actually specify where the hangings took place. For many years it was believed that the 19 people who were executed in Salem were hanged at the summit of Gallows Hill, on the edge of town to the west, where the town would meet for large gatherings. Seems like after some homework, the hill alone would be too hard to climb, not an ideal spot to hear or see the live trials, and was too thick and heavily wooded. Maps of 1700 Salem show Gallows Hill marked on the map, but no actual marker for the execution site. I feel like a detective all of a sudden. A team of researchers began to reconsider all of the evidence around 2010, eras of homework collected over the years, and eventually concluded that the real execution spot was Proctor's Ledge. Boom, baby! This was confirmed in 2016. Part of the evidence included 1692 eyewitnesses' accounts who wrote in journals that they were able to see the hangings from their homes to actually remains being dug up and found now. Now I know what you're thinking, it's named after John Proctor. No, it's not. However, odd timing, as he was one of the witches accused of witchcraft along with 3 of his other mistresses. Locals say that the lady in white visits Proctor's Ledge. Some visitors claim to have caught the sight of her, though others catch only her disembodied voice. Are these the phantoms of the unsettled spirits tied to the grounds where they were hanged for eternity? Who knows? Number 3, Charter Street Burial Grounds. The Charter Street Burial Grounds started in 1637, also known as Old Burying Point or the Charter Street Cemetery, is the oldest cemetery in Salem. Many early and famous Salem residents are buried here, such as John Hawthorne, a judge in the Salem witch trials of 1692. Hawthorne, whose father had been a Salem magistrate, was born in 1641 and had 6 children. Hawthorne experienced several deaths in his family, including those of all his 3 brothers. Hawthorne died in 1717 at the age of 76, never apologizing for the role in the Salem witch trials. His headstone is surrounded by granite rectangles to help preserve what is left of the original stone. Being one of the oldest cemeteries and the sickening things that happen there, ghosts and spirits are often seen around the gravesite. There have been many strange occurrences here. Witch stuff aside, about 400 years of ghostly encounters have happened at the Old Burying Point Cemetery. Over the years, people have successfully captured EVP of voices from beyond the grave at the site. If you can hear me, say something. Stop yelling. Oh, sorry. Photographs of mysterious shadows, orbs, white mist, and even full apparitions are seen here. One of these apparitions is believed to be Mary Bright Corey, who died 1684. She was the second wife of Gilles Corey, who later became an unfortunate victim of the witch trials himself. Another ghost seen is the powdered blue dress lady, whilst holding a picnic basket in one hand and sometimes accompanied by a young boy. Normally, once the cameras come out, the lady in white transitions into numerous bright orbs or vanishes altogether. Maybe the ghost woman is the same Mary Corey forever watching over Judge Hawthorne's grave. Number 2. Gallows Hill. Okay, so we were just talking about what happened to some of the accused during these hysterical trials and all the historical places that saw such violence. One of the most interesting witches tried of that was Gilles Corey. Tried as a witch but never hanged. Actually, the old man known as Gilles Corey was pressed to death with the judge's orders of him being a strong and stubborn old man and would not for the life of him indulge in the nonsense he was being accused for. He never admitted that he was a witch, even throughout his torture. They laid him down and put a board on his back and proceeded to stone him to death, piling up stones on the board, resulting in crushing and eventually perishing underneath it. Only took about 4 days. Gilles Corey apparently repeatedly yelled more weight, further cementing his plea of not guilty to everyone watching at Gallows Hill. With his last breath, Gilles apparently cursed the town of Salem, and this area is now an unearthly hotspot for paranormal activity. The Gallows Hill that most people are aware of is nothing but a baseball diamond, but underneath that baseball diamond, bone fragments and coffins have been found. Interesting, because no witches were ever buried in coffins. Maybe vampires? Gilles died from his inflicted torture on September 19th, 1692, just after the 8th anniversary of his wife Mary's passing. Strange sounds emerge from the area at night, including loud knockings, thumpings that wake up neighbors from their bed, and, of course, the full-bodied apparitions said to walk the grounds yelling in the middle of the night. There have been full-bodied apparitions spotted within the woods, with disembodied voices shrieking in the middle of the night. The disturbingly loud voices yelled throughout the area have had some locals scratching their heads. Is this the ghost of Gilles himself, speaking his curse upon the town for all to hear? Shh! Trying to sleep! And coming in at number 1, House of Seven Gables. Locals say the Turner Ingersoll Mansion, or also known as famously the House of Seven Gables, is the most haunted spot in Salem. How many haunted spots are there? Ghosts are just like really competitive. Now a prominent museum, protected in its original form, used for plays and reenactments by the locals, the original structure was simple in nature, with only 2.5 rooms and just under 3 stories tall. By the time of John Turner's death, the prominent merchant, sea captain, and owner of the house, he was one of the most wealthy men in the entirety of Massachusetts. Turner and Ingersoll's House of the Seven Gables is a ghostly reminder of the tormented souls both trying and being tried at the time of the hangings. But the Turner Ingersoll is a reminder for more than just lost shipping fortunes and curses, as it's also a homely reminder of Judge Hawthorne himself and the guilt he inflicted on that town. As records show, Hawthorne may have feigned sympathy for the accused witches, but he never regretted his involvement in their trials or executions. And he certainly never expressed any remorse during the trials themselves for sending the accused to their death. Following the witch hysteria of the late 1600s, the Hawthorne family lost most of their wealth, no doubt influenced by the families of the accused witches who sought out justice for their dead loved ones. Acting now is only a museum of historic place. Each year, the museum hosts a series of theatrical plays, all of which surrounding the Salem witch trials. Such plays titled as Legacy of the Hanging, Judge Hawthorne, and Spirits of the Gables. But some of the actors aren't, well, very alive. As for the ghosts outside of the theatrical performances, well, everybody's got their own opinions on that, but tour guides and employees tend to avoid the attic, where some people have complained about being choked by ghostly figures. Local lore has many different stories to tell, and so do many of the visitors who enter Salem's most haunted house. Others report seeing a phantom boy who enjoys playing in the attic. Throughout the day, his giggles and laughs can be heard. Always giggling kids, eh? They're like the scariest ghosts. Well, that's about all the proof and lore I need to believe it. Imagine doing a show and a ghost just saying, line?
Number 5 on this list is Goody Cole. Now, Goody Cole is a little interesting because today she is not a physical witch, but the ghost of her former witch-like self. Back in the 1600s in Hampton in the United States, Goody Cole lived with her older husband at the time. Once 1656 rolled around though, she didn't live with him anymore. Goody Cole was arrested and found guilty of witchcraft. It was said that she had a mumbling habit, looked extremely witch-like, and also had some animal-related deaths tracked back to her in what would have been used for apparent rituals. It was also said that she was capable of turning herself into an animal and would often do so to disguise herself and trick others. When she was arrested, she was treated extremely poorly, often tortured, starved, and this whole process went on for years. After 6 years of this, she petitioned to be released so that she could support her husband, who was close to death at the time. The court agreed that they would let her do this, but she had to pay a sizable fee that she obviously didn't have access to because she was in jail. Her husband eventually died alone without the support of his wife, something that was said to eat at Godie's conscience continually. Now, the manner of Goody Cole's death is sort of up in the air. Some say that she was stabbed with a stake for being a witch, others say that she was finally released, but she was so old that she died in her home alone soon after, whereas some people say that she just died in prison. But one thing's for certain, Goody Cole was so unhappy with the people of Hampton actually that she never left. Many people in the area have reported in the older parts of town that they still see a dark, shadowy figure resembling an old woman. A phantom all in white that stalks people through the streets and can be seen in the windows looking down upon you as you walk through the city. People believe that this witch won't cause you any harm, but her goal is to make you feel as ostracized as possible, the exact way that she was made to feel back when she was still living. Number 4 on this list are the Boo Hags. Typically associated with the haunting of the coastal plains of South Carolina, it should be noted that there's no reason to believe that they could only be limited to this area, but there has been a large amount of activity of them here. Now, I should also note that the jury is still a little bit out on if these creatures are exclusively witches or exclusively vampires. I think that the truth of the matter is probably a horrifying mixture of both. Legend says that the Boo Hag needs to get sustenance from a person's breath, and that's how they sustain themselves. This action is somewhat similar to how the Dementors act in Harry Potter, but still with some notable differences. For starters, a Boo Hag is a fleshy creature that does not have any skin of its own. Therefore, it is simply a red tendon-esque humanoid being. Because they don't have any skin of their own, they will often steal the skin of their victims and fit it to their bodies until that skin inevitably deteriorates. The action of sucking someone's breath isn't as simple as my Harry Potter example either. Typically, once a Boo Hag finds a suitable victim, they will stalk that individual back to their home and wait until they're sleeping. Once they're passed out, the Boo Hag will break into their home and straddle the person who is asleep. This action is referred to by locals as a riding from a Boo Hag. Now, if the person wakes during this process and struggles, they will steal your skin and leave you for dead, but oftentimes you don't even realize that this is happening to you. They will suck your energy and it will put you into a deep catatonic-like state. After they've gotten their necessary energy, they'll leave you alone, and you'll wake the next morning feeling drowsy, most likely, not even realizing that you were ridden from a Boo Hag. Number 3 on this list is the White Witch of the Rose Hall Plantation in Jamaica. The Rose Hall Plantation is near Montego Bay. However, the witch in question is the ghost of a witch named Annie Palmer, and Annie Palmer wasn't from Jamaica at all. In fact, Annie Palmer spent most of her life in Haiti. She was born there and lived there with her parents for quite some time until they sadly passed away due to yellow fever. Afterwards, she was adopted by a witch who wasn't shy in passing her gifts on to young Annie. Regularly practicing witchcraft and voodoo, Annie soon became a strong witch in her own right. After she grew up, she moved to Jamaica and married John Palmer, taking his last name. Now, this is where things get a little bit crazy though. Annie murdered John Palmer. Then she got married again and murdered that husband. And then she got married again and murdered that husband. You'd think that these guys would have recognized that marrying Annie might not have been the best idea, but I guess love just conquers all. Annie didn't stop with her husbands though. She murdered countless slaves that worked on that plantation. This was right up until she was murdered herself by a slave named Taku. The people back then attempted to perform a voodoo ritual on this witch, not wanting to have her ever return again. However, it didn't work the way that they intended it to. The voodoo ritual actually trapped her at this location, and now she's said to be forever haunting the Rose Hall on Montego Bay. People have seen her ghost before, and they've heard screaming coming from nothing. The vision of a woman in white will appear sometimes, and it is said that if you stay at this plantation too long, then some deep misfortune will fall upon you or your family. So beware. Number 2 on this list is Jenny Greenteeth. Jenny Greenteeth is a witch in British folklore that is said to haunt the waters of Lancashire Lancashire, Cheshire, and Shropshire. I know, it's a lot of shires. Jenny is a river witch and lives in the rivers of these areas looking for victims to drag down with her. As you'd imagine, with a name like Green Teeth, her appearance is pretty grotesque. Green algae-like hair, a wrinkled witchy face, skin that is the same color as a bog, and a weird fleshy exterior. Jenny is certainly not a looker. But I suppose it doesn't matter a whole lot, as she uses the swamp like water and pond scum to mask her appearance so you can't see her beneath the filth. The origin of Jenny Greenteeth is still up for debate, but the bare bones of the tale are pretty consistent. Jenny was a girl in a local British town who was the victim to some heavy bullying. One day when she was at her job getting water from the well, somebody yelled at her that they hope she falls in and dies. Well, that's exactly what happened. Her spirit manifested as Jenny Greenteeth, this old hag who now haunts the waters in this area. Jenny is not simply a harmless witch either. She preys on people, specifically children that get too close to the water. Sometimes she will try to lure them towards the riverbank by calling out to them or singing a tune where no one can figure out where it's coming from. Now, this tactic is one that we've talked about on this channel before with the Utah water babies and is very successful. She lunges her hand out and grabs them, dragging them into the water where they will drown and never be seen again. This water witch is known by all the locals in the area, with everyone having some slightly different adaptations to the legend. General consensus though, if you hear someone singing from the rivers of Britain, don't go near it. Number 1 on this list is La Lechuza. La Lechuza is a witch based in Mexican folklore that is said to haunt the Mexican nights. I wish I could pinpoint the location down for you guys to be a specific region in Mexico, but this witch is sadly far too mobile for that. La Lechuza used to live in a small Mexican town and regularly practice witchcraft. Her intentions were foul though, and would regularly cause harm to others, whether that be to them directly or to their livelihood. The townsfolk, once they discovered that she was the cause of their misfortune, raided her home and viciously murdered her. They didn't kill her well enough though, because her spirit still clings to life to this day. Said to regularly take the form of an owl and fly throughout Mexico, La Lechuza is constantly on the hunt for food. Her preferred meal is young men. This bird is apparently massive, and once it sets its sights on you, it will be nearly impossible to escape. Some people have reported that she is so big that they've seen her run cars off of the road and eat her victims in the wreck. She also employs some other tactics instead of just brute force. Sometimes she will mask her voice as a baby and sit outside your door until you open it, and then she'll pounce. You may also hear the consistent racket of an owl howling in the night. Go and check your window to see what the commotion is and become this owl lady's dinner. Basically, she is a giant owl that you can't run from, you can't beat in a fight, and is also able to outwit you with some strange tactics. She haunts all of Mexico, and you just need to hope that if you were there, she doesn't pick you to be her next meal.
Kicking us off in 5th place, we have Tituba, one of the first women to be accused of witchcraft during the Salem witch trials of 1692 to 93. It is believed that she was taken from her tribe and forced into slavery in Barbados, where she learned her skills in witchcraft from mistresses and other slaves. When the head of her plantation passed, she was inherited by Minister Samuel Parris and was then brought to Salem, Massachusetts. Tituba was accused of practicing witchcraft by a young woman, Abigail Williams and Elizabeth Parris, who also happened to be the daughter of her owner. The girls had been showing signs of being bewitched, and it was believed that Tituba told the girls tales of voodoo and witchcraft prior to said accusations. A neighbor of the Parris family, Mary Sibley, recommended a witch's cake be baked to reveal the names of the witches, and instructed Tituba to bake a rye cake with the victim's urine and feed the cake to a dog. Dogs were believed to support witches and their supernatural powers by following the witch's requests. When the symptoms shown by the young woman did not pass, this was shown as evidence that Tituba possessed the powers of witchcraft. She was allowed to speak in court, becoming the first person to confess to practicing witchcraft in Salem in March of 1962. She also confessed to speaking with the devil, stating that he ordered her to worship him and hurt the children of the village, along with discussing tales of black dogs, hogs, a yellow bird, red and black rats, cats, a fox, and a wolf that she had cursed. She was sent to jail in Boston to await trial and punishment on March 7, eventually stuck in jail until being sold to an unknown person for the price of her jail fees that Samuel had refused to pay. Coming in fourth, Moll Dyer, one of the witches that inspired the Blair Witch Project. Residing in Leonardtown, Maryland, her origins are clouded in mystery, the most popular theory being that she was a noblewoman escaping an unsavory past. Taking up an isolated residence outside of town limits, she developed a reputation as a skilled herbalist. Those skills, combined with her unknown past and secluded lifestyle, planted the suspicion of witchcraft in villagers' heads. In the winter of 1697, the weather was so harsh that many crops failed, and a deadly plague swept through the town. It is believed that these were revenge from Moll, after the townspeople had been blaming her for every misfortune and hardship they faced. A meeting was held amongst town vigilantes, and they decided to form a mob to run her out of town. They set fire to her cottage in the dark of night, and Moll ran until her legs gave out, kneeling by a large rock. She raised her hand to the sky, calling down a further curse to the townspeople, and eventually froze to that same rock, leaving her handprint as a notice of her final act. The boulder has since been preserved as a landmark, and even though the handprint is no longer clearly visible, visitors have reported feeling profoundly uncomfortable or experiencing terrible aches and pains around it, and cameras have been known to malfunction in its presence. On the coldest nights of the year, people have reported seeing a woman with long white hair and wearing a white dress walking through the fields and woods near the town. Third place, Ray Sherwood, the last convicted witch of Virginia. Also known as the Witch of Pungo, she was born in 1660 to carpenter John White and his wife Susan, and married her husband, farmer James Sherwood, in 1680, whom she birthed 3 sons with. Grace was a renowned healer, growing her own herbs on their land, also acting as a midwife. While no official paintings or drawings of her exist, she is described as very attractive and tall, with a sense of humor. She was known to wear trousers instead of dresses while doing yard work, something almost unheard of at the time. The first accusation of wrongdoing against her came in 1697, when Richard Capps accused her of using a spell to end the life of his bull, of which the court could not make a decision. Grace and her husband filed a countersuit, which was settled out of court. In 1698, Grace was then accused by neighbor John Gisborne of enchanting his pigs and cotton crop. No court action was taken this time, and another countersuit by the Sherwoods went nowhere. In that same year, Elizabeth Barnes alleged that Grace had taken the form of a black cat, entered the Barnes' home, jumped over her bed, whipped her, and left through the keyhole. The allegations went nowhere. Same for the countersuit, leaving the Sherwood couple to pay court fees for the 3rd time. After her husband's death in 1701, Grace managed to dodge further allegations until 1705, when she got into a fight with neighbor Elizabeth Hill. She sued Elizabeth and her husband for a battery and was awarded damages of 20 shillings, so roughly the equivalent to 170 Canadian dollars today. In March, the Princess and County Justices assembled 2 juries, both made up of women, with the first being ordered to search Elizabeth's home for wax or baked items that might indicate she was a witch. Led by Elizabeth Hill herself, Grace was examined by the second jury of 12 ancient and knowing women, appointed to look for markings on her body that might be brands of the devil. And they discovered 2 marks not like theirs or like those of any other woman known to them. On July 5th, the justices ordered a trial by ducking to take place. If Grace were to sink, she would be deemed innocent. If she were to float and survive, she would be declared as guilty and imprisoned. Around 10 a.m. on July 10th, she was taken down a dirt lane now known as Witch Duck Road to a plantation near the mouth of the Lynn Haven River. The event attracted people from all over the colony, who began to shout, "Duck the witch!" It is believed that her right thumb was bound to her left big toe and her left thumb to her right big toe, and then she was flung into the water, where she quickly floated to the surface. The sheriff then tied a 13-pound Bible around her neck, causing her to sink, but she untied herself and returned to the surface, cementing her status as a witch. She was then imprisoned for 8 years and lived quietly until her death in 1740. According to legend, her sons placed her body near the fireplace, and a wind came down the chimney, with her corpse disappearing amongst the embers. The only clue left behind was a cloven hoofprint. Stories about the devil taking her body, unnatural storms, and loitering black cats quickly arose after her death, and local men ended the life of every feline they could find. This widespread elimination of cats is believed to have caused the infestation of rats and mice in 1743. In our second place position, we're traveling over to 1662 Scotland, where Isabelle Godie, housewife to John Gilbert, residents of the Aldern region, and that's about all we know of her personal life. It is believed that she was tortured before her confession. Methods used at the time included the use of thumb screws, foot roasting, witch pricking to test for a devil's mark, sleep deprivation, or isolation with food and water restrictions. Ugh. The specific details of the original accusation or reason for her confession are unknown, but are believed to be part of a conspiracy to torment the local minister, Harry Forbes, who was a zealous extremist who had a fear of witchcraft. And for a woman who would not have been taught to read or write, she was extremely eloquent. Her first confession described an encounter with the devil in the church at night, where she renounced her baptism and the devil put his mark on her shoulder before sucking her blood from it. Other meetings took place at several locations, where she recounted having sexual intercourse with the devil, who she described as a very cold and rough but great man. She detailed his appearance as having forked and cloven feet that were sometimes covered with shoes or boots. Details were given of taking a child's body from a grave and spoiling crops, along with information about covens and where they danced. The coven ate and drank the best of food at houses they reached by flying through the air on magical horses and entered through the windows, where they were entertained by the Queen of the Fairies in her home at Downey Hill, which was filled with water bowls that frightened Isabelle. She claimed to have made clay figures of the male offspring of the owner of her land to cause them suffering or death, and that she had assumed the form of a jackdaw bird with other members of the coven who had transformed into animals like cats and hares. Some parts of her testimony, such as her description of the king and queen of the fairies, has been cut short when the notaries have just noted, etc., because they were unable to keep pace with the volume of information being narrated to them. A little over 2 weeks later, on May 3rd, Isabelle's second confession was transcribed. She expanded on details about the coven by providing the nicknames of its members and as many of the spirits that waited on them as she could remember, including her own servant spirit, whom she called Red River, who dressed all in black. Claims included once again having the ability to transform into animals, with the individual chance used supplied. Over the duration of all of her confessions, a total of 27 benevolent or malevolent chants were given, more than in any other British witchcraft case. She testified that the devil handmade elf arrows that were then enhanced by small, roughly spoken elf boys. The devil allocated a number of arrows to each coven member with instructions that they were to be fired in his name. If the intended target, human or animal, was touched by the arrow, she claimed that they would pass, even if wearing protective armor. Spells used to inflict illness and torment on local minister Harry Forbes were also described. On May 15th, Isabelle was brought before her interrogators for a third time. Same as her first two confessions, the transcript begins by detailing her pact with the devil. Taking the information she provided previously about the elf arrows a step further, she revealed the names of those whose lives she had ended, along with supplying names of other coven members with details of who they had unalived. She described an instance where the devil had sent her to run an errand disguised as a hare, and how, while in that form, she was chased by a pack of dogs until she was able to utter the chant to transform herself back into a human. She mentioned that while dogs could not kill her in that disguise, any marks sustained would still show after returning to human form. Descriptions of dining with the devil, along with salacious details concerning sexual relations with said devil, and broad characteristics of his were chronicled. The fourth and final confession on May 27th was mainly to confirm the three previous testimonies and an attempt to elicit more information about the members of the coven. After the 6 weeks that it took to record her testimonies, the panel of interrogators believed they had enough proof to request a trial from the Privy Council, which was granted. While there is no official record of the exact trial outcome, it is believed that Isabelle would have been found guilty and, following the verdict, would have been transported by cart to Gallows Hill, where she would have been subject to a public strangulation and burning, the posthumous burning, to ensure that she couldn't haunt the community from beyond her grave. Granted, locals to the area claim that she is the Green Lady that can be seen haunting them to this day. Finally, in first place, we have the only male witch on this list, Grigory Rasputin. Close family friend of the last royal Russian family, he was originally introduced to them as a faith healer who could aid their only son, Alexei, who suffered from hemophilia. A self-described mystic and holy man, he was a figure of much debate amongst the royal court, with some describing him as a visionary and prophet, others as a charlatan and scam artist. Historians believe that his scandalous reputation and influence over the Romanovs helped to discredit and overthrow the family. Having taken many pilgrimages to holy monasteries, he developed a reputation as a reverent holy man, gaining a small circle of followers who believed in his miracles, and began leading private prayer meetings, much to the scorn and suspicion of villagers and priests. It was rumored that female followers were ceremonially washing him before each meeting, that the group sang strange songs, and even that they had joined a religious sect whose rituals were rumored to include self-flagellation and sexual orgies. orgies. Word of Rasputin's activity and charisma began to spread in Siberia during the early 1900s, where he developed many friendships with high-ranking religious leaders, eventually leading to his introduction to the royal family. It's not certain when Rasputin first acted as Alexei's healer, with the earliest record on date being when he was summoned by Alexandra to pray for Alexei when he had an internal hemorrhage in the spring of 1907, with the young royal healing by the next morning. Due to his closeness with the family, Rasputin was allowed intimate access in situations that governesses to the children described as inappropriate. One governess in particular was released from her position simply for voicing her concerns about Rasputin being allowed around the children while they were clad in nothing but their nightgown. Another of the nursery governesses claimed in the spring of 1910 that she was seduced into sexual acts against her will by Rasputin, having originally been a devotee of him but was later disillusioned. The empress refused to believe her and said that everything Rasputin does is holy, later dismissing the governess. It was whispered in society that Rasputin had seduced not only the Tsarina, but also the 4 young Grand Duchesses. Rasputin had released passionate letters written to him by the Tsarina and the 4 young Grand Duchesses that throughout society fueled the rumors. In 1916, a group of nobles led by Prince Felix Yusupov banded together, deciding to assassinate the holy man for his influence over Alexandria and her family. It is said that the prince invited Rasputin to his place shortly after midnight, where he offered the man tea and cakes, which had been laced with cyanide. Rasputin initially refused the cakes, but then began to eat them, and to Felix's surprise, appeared unaffected by the poison. Rasputin then asked for wine, which had also been poisoned, and drank 3 glasses, but still showed no sign of distress. At around 2:30 in the morning, Felix excused himself to go upstairs, where his fellow conspirators were waiting. He grabbed a revolver and returned to the basement, telling Rasputin that he'd better look at the crucifix and say a prayer, referring to the crucifix in the room, and then shot him once in the chest. Rasputin leapt up from the bullet and attacked Felix, who freed himself with some effort and fled upstairs. Rasputin then followed Felix outdoors, where he was shot once again and collapsed into a snowbank. The group of men then wrapped his body in cloth, drove it to the Petrovsky Bridge, and dropped it into the Malaya Nevka River.
Number 5 on this list is the prayer test. This test basically acts as the single most important audition of your life. It was thought that witches were unable to recite the word of God, and that reading or speaking the Bible would cause their immediate demise. Therefore, they would have accused witches come to the front of the court or gathering and recite verses from the Bible. Now, this test makes a decent amount of sense if you think about it, although we can't forget what era we were in when this took place. Not everyone was literate at this time. In fact, a lot of them weren't. I can also imagine the immense pressure that you would feel to perform that verse to perfection. Speaking as somebody who's been through their fair share of auditions in life, I can tell you that auditions are nerve-wracking to begin with, but add on the fact that your life is on the line, that really raises the stakes, I think. And it wasn't enough to have you simply not go up in flames as you were reading it. A simple slip-up, a mispronunciation, a little pause, all of these things were evidence that the accused was a witch and was struggling to get through the verse. The crazy thing about this as well is that even if you did recite this verse flawlessly without fail, you might still be put to death anyways. George Burroughs had to perform this test during the Salem trials, and even after he absolutely nailed it, they still killed him. The people were so convinced that he was a witch who needed to die that they chalked up his performance as being a devilish trick and killed him regardless. Number 4 on this list is witch cakes. Witch cakes are pretty unique in how they were administered because your fate wasn't decided by a person or the cake itself. It was actually by a dog. Now, I feel for these pups because they had to eat these concoctions and they aren't palatable at all. What people would do is take a sample of the victim's urine, so the person presumably being affected by the witch, take a sample of their urine, and then they take some rye meal and a sprinkle of ashes, and that's it. Take those 3 things, mix them together, toss them in the oven, and then bake it up. Now, I don't really know where they got the idea that urine and ashes would tell us anything about these witches, but that's the conclusion that they got. They then take the dog, and it was thought that dogs were not only man's best friend, but actually witches' best friends as well. That dogs back in the day had some sort of tie to witches, and that they were supporters of witches. So you take this witch cake, you feed it to the dog, and now you just observe that dog's behavior, and the accused witch has to just cross their fingers that this dog doesn't start acting weirdly. biting, barking at nothing, just generally acting strangely. It was thought that if the dog did this or exhibited any of the same symptoms that the victim was experiencing, then witchcraft was assuredly at foot, and then we can start pointing fingers. I gotta say though that I seriously feel for the dog in this instance, because I mean the poor guy did literally nothing at all, and now he's got to eat this urine cake that may or may not curse him with something. So yeah, the dog's got it rough here, guys. Number 3 on this list is called the touch test. Witches were said to have the ability to control other people. Basically, they could cast a spell on you and you're now either under their control or in a lot of pain. If these witches were to touch the person who's believed to be under their curse or spell though, then that individual would have some type of response. Let's say someone who's controlled by these witches starts acting strange or frantic. Then a simple touch by the witch would calm them completely. I'm not really sure if this theory on witches and touching their victims has been founded by anything or is true to this day, but back then they definitely believed that this was the case. The problem with this test though was that there was a lot of wannabe actors back then. In 1662, there were 2 older women who were being accused of witchcraft. Their names were Amy Denny and Rose Cullender. Now, they had reportedly cursed some young girls and were causing them serious harm, which manifested itself in the way of seizures. These girls would have seizures, but it was believed that if the witch who was possessing them, so Amy and Rose, were to touch them, then the seizure would stop immediately. Well, sure enough, this was tested in court, and it actually worked. The second that the old women touched these girls, the seizures stopped immediately and their hands just grew completely soft and totally calm. But let's not kill them just yet. They then blindfolded the young girls and did the exact same experiment, but now with other people subbing in and touching them. Well, it turns out the girls were faking and would stop seizuring to other people who touched them instead of just the older women. Perfect. So Amy and Rose, they can't possibly be witches then. We ran the test, they passed, they should be set free. Maybe in today's world that's what would happen, but not in 1662. Both of them were hung anyways, and the young girls got off scot-free. Number 2 on this list is called pricking. This was a horrible test that was basically just a glorified means of torture. Now I'm sure that most of you know what a witch mark is, but if you don't, then it's basically a mark from the devil that indicates you have a pact with Satan, and witches have these on their bodies. However, if there's an accused witch that doesn't have a witch mark, that doesn't mean that they're off the hook. It's possible that they still have a witch mark. It's just hard to see, or it can't be seen to the naked eye. Well, if this was the case, then you need a professional pricker, right? A professional pricker is someone who works solely on discovering witches' marks. That's right, guys, this was so common that they actually had a career path that came out of it. It was believed that a witch's mark didn't feel any pain and in turn wouldn't show any signs of weaknesses. Therefore, if you pricked them with a sharp point, then the person wouldn't be in any pain and no blood would come from this prick. So professional prickers would have their accused witches and they would just take their chosen sharp object and just stab them until you had a spot that didn't bleed. And then, because you didn't bleed, they would kill you for being a witch anyways. It also didn't stop at just pricking, but it even went to scratching as well. The victim of an apparent witch would be allowed to come and scratch that witch until they drew blood. This was supposed to cause the victim some relief from their symptoms, and if it did, then that would be enough to make the accused person guilty of witchcraft and they would be executed. Yeah, you really did not want to get stuck with the pricking test. Number 1 on this list is the swimming test. Now this is one that I'm sure most of you have already heard about, but it has to be on this list based on just simply how ridiculous it was. Now even though in hindsight this test was nuts, I do kind of understand the logic of how they got there in the first place. It was believed back then that witches had rebuffed the sacrament of Christ, meaning that baptism was definitely a no-go for a witch. Because water is tied heavily to baptism, the logic followed that if you were a witch and you were thrown into the water, then the water would reject your body from entering and therefore you would float to the top of it. To test this theory, they would take their suspected witches, strip them down naked, hog tie their limbs, and then throw you into the water, and if you floated, then you're a witch, but if you sank, you're just a person. Again, guys, this kind of makes sense, except for the people who weren't actually witches and sank to the bottom. Now, I should note that they would sometimes tie a rope around your body, and if you sank, they would pull you back up to the top. But this only happened sometimes. Other times, they would just throw you in, and if you sank and drowned, then oh well, I mean, you drowned now and at least you weren't a witch. Also, this tying of the rope wasn't a perfect science either. A lot of times people who sank would drown anyways as they were being pulled up. Basically, just the accusation of being a witch meant that you would be sentenced to death, because if you did somehow manage to float, then now you're a witch and you're gonna be burned or hung, and if you did sink, as most people did, then you'd probably just drown. Sometimes, even if you did sink and you did then get pulled back up to the top and survived, they would just kill you anyways. Back then, if more than one person accused you of being a witch, then you were pretty much as good as dead. Number 5 on this list is what I'm going to be nicknaming the Scottish Witch from the Woods. I stumbled across a Scottish story about a witch where they were unable to discover her name. Hundreds of years ago, when Scotland was still being first developed, there was a village in the north of the country. This village was positioned directly next to a forest that they wanted to chop down and expand into. When they began their process of chopping down the forest, a witch, or the Witch of the Woods, came out and warned them that if they continued, she would curse their entire community. The women would become infertile, the crops would never grow, and people would go missing. Fearing for their safety, the group came to an agreement with this witch, where they were allowed to chop down a small section of the forest in exchange for leaving one sack every harvest of grain or produce by the edge of the forest. This agreement held true for quite a while until the community started to get less fearful and more greedy. They decided to go against this witch and chop down the rest of the forest without fear of consequence. When the witch came out of the forest again to address their betrayal, they refused to listen, and they hung her immediately. Right before she was executed though, she said that the new price was 3 bags of grain. This fell on deaf ears though, except for one fearful farmer that decided to heed the warning for a little while. The community went on thriving until once again that farmer's fear was replaced with greed. He stopped delivering the grain, and that very same day, his youngest daughter went missing. The community looked everywhere, but nobody could find her until somebody checked the mill. Through the bricks and all over the walls, blood started dripping down to the ground, and they knew exactly where his daughter went. That mill has since been torn down, but it was replaced with a silo, and to this day, the locals in that area still think that that silo is haunted by the Scottish Witch in the Woods. Number 4 on this list goes to the Paisley Witches. The Paisley Witches are actually nicknamed after the town of Paisley in Scotland, where these witches were based. Christian Shaw was an 11-year-old girl who was the daughter of the higher up in the Scottish community. It was this 11-year-old girl who fell victim to the curse of several witches. It started with a deep sickness that manufactured itself like any other: fevers, chills, exhaustion. But some reports say that it became much more than that. The story goes that Shaw on one occasion levitated from her bed, and on another occasion started chanting some deep curse. It was clear to everybody involved, including Shaw, that some form of Scottish witchcraft was afoot. Now, she made it evident that she believed multiple witches were involved in causing her ailment, 7 of them in fact. A trial was held for these witches where it was discovered that they all had the witch's mark, or the devil's mark as some like to call it, on their bodies. After this evidence came to light, the jury's decision was easy and all of the witches were sentenced to death. Now, this story was a long time ago, and it's hard to know for certain whether these individuals had anything to do with Shaw's ailment and witchcraft, or if they were wrongly accused, tried improperly, and the story has been exaggerated over time, which frankly is not unlike other potential witch stories during this period. The only thing that we can say for certain though is that the people back then and the 11-year-old Christian Shaw believed wholeheartedly that this group of Paisley witches was just that: witches. Number 3 on this list is Helen Duncan. Helen Duncan was a Scottish witch who traveled throughout Europe and actually isn't that far removed from present day. She died in 1956 and is known by some to be the last Scottish witch. As a young girl, she was considered by most to be a normal, albeit outspoken and loud, growing child. It wasn't until midway through her life that she started seriously practicing witchcraft. Helen garnered a name for herself by regularly performing seances every evening and having the ability to communicate with the dead. During her nightly rituals, she would invite viewers to come and watch. These viewers had reported seeing the materialization of ghostly figures directly in front of their eyes when Helen entered her deep witchly trance. Helen was also capable of and would often excrete a strange-looking ectoplasm from her mouth while she was doing this. And if this wasn't enough, Duncan could also see things that others couldn't. At one point, the ghost of a sailor appeared and talked about a very secretive incident that had happened in World War II that the public, or Helen Duncan, couldn't have possibly known about. After hearing this information, the authorities realized that they couldn't have Duncan revealing any important state secrets about the war and arrested her for witchcraft immediately. It was revealed during her trial that some of her witchy ways were not what people were led to believe though. Like her ectoplasm was simply the regurgitation of a cheesecloth made to look like some type of ghostly substance. Even though some of her abilities were proven to be fraudulent, it still doesn't explain how she was able to accurately predict or say the things that she couldn't have possibly known. Helen Duncan didn't use any of her abilities to harm anyone, but the capability to potentially talk to the dead, it's still very chilling. Number 2 on this list is Thomas Weir and his sister Griselle. What makes Thomas and his sister so scary is that nobody expected them to be involved in witchcraft at all. Up until the end of his life, Thomas was known by most to be a nice man of the community held in high esteem. However, nearing the end of his life, Thomas came clean about who he really was, telling the entire community during a religious service that he and his sister had been performing witchcraft for years, going into deep detail about how they had consistent communication with the devil and had devoted their entire lives to carrying out his bidding. This bidding manifested itself in many different ways, most of which involved causing harm to others, or in Thomas's case, getting it on with animals. Yeah. He was a weird dude. At first the community barely believed him, but after the sister came out and corroborated his story in detail as well, they started piecing it together. Thomas was always walking around with a big black staff. The neighbors had reported hearing strange sounds in the evening coming from their home and weird lights going off. Suddenly the guy that everybody thought they knew as their nice friendly neighbor was somebody else entirely. Reports say that when he was burned at the stake, he took far longer to die than a human should. Also, his staff was burned with him, and it emitted an extremely strange sound and moved in unnatural directions when it was burning, as if it was being possessed by some force. I suppose that in the case of Thomas and Griselle, they had done such a good job at hiding their identities as witches and had been extremely methodical with their crimes, that before they died, they just had to let the world know just how evil they actually were. Number 1 on this list is Isabelle Godie. Isabelle was a Scottish witch from the 1600s, and frankly, she did everything. Through several confessions that she made on her own accord, without the pressure of torture or coercion from higher ups, Isabelle admitted to taking part in a wide array of witchcraft activities. She admitted that she had freely let the devil suck blood from her neck and that she had romantic relationships with the devil before. She admitted to taking the body out of child's graves and using it in a ritual to destroy people's crops. She said that she had made clay effigies or voodoo dolls of someone's children and used these to harm and even kill them. Isabelle was also part of a coven, a group of witches whose intentions were evil and had the ability to change their form into animals. She described in detail the brutal murders that she had committed for the devil and her fellow witches. She even offered up information about spells they had used to inflict illnesses on people, uttering some of them to the council she was confessing to. Now, it's unclear exactly why Isabelle decided to confess to these heinous crimes and oust herself as being a witch. She had to be aware that confessing to these crimes of this nature would surely mean her execution. It had been said, though, that she felt extreme guilt for her crimes, and that's why she decided to come forward and accept the consequences as they were. Regardless of what her intentions were, though, Isabelle Godie has to go down as one of the most dangerous known witches in Scottish history.
Starting off this countdown, we have the North Berwick Witches. North Berwick is a small town in Scotland where some of the most brutal and horrific witch trials took place. It all started during the reign of King James VI. While on his way to get his new bride in 1589, he encountered a series of disastrous storms. In fact, the storms were so bad that he was forced to head back home. He immediately thought that the storms were the work of witches. It didn't help that back then a rumor had started that a witch had sailed out on the River Forth to conjure up some storms. So from then on, King James was dead set on finding these witches. In fact, 70 to 200 women were accused of being witches. Most of them were tortured and then executed. Now, apparently during these trials, he did come across a number of of women that admitted to being witches. They claimed that they had all made deals with the devil and were now under his command. They also claimed that they would use one of the churches there to hold their covens. They even said that this was the place where they had summoned the devil himself. In fact, this church was located right on the seafront, so James was like, aha! The perfect place to conjure up storms. All of you are guilty. As a result, these witches were strangled and then burnt at the stake. In our fourth spot today, we have Sabrina Spellman. Although she's a fictional character, Sabrina still deserves a spot on today's list. Without too many spoilers, the show The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is about Sabrina, a teenage witch who on her 16th birthday has to sign her name in the Book of the Beast. Upon doing so, she makes a deal with Satan. She basically gives herself to him in exchange for magical powers. At first, Sabrina refused to do so because she didn't want to give up her mortal life, but later on she was forced into doing it in order to stop a number of evil forces that were murdering many of the townsfolk. Once she signed the book, she is forced to do Satan's bidding. She has to basically bow down to him and do whatever he instructs her to do. In return, Sabrina's magic became even stronger. In fact, she became the fourth witch in all of history to summon demonic blue hellfire, which was then used in order to fight off the Greendale 13. And for her to do that as a relatively new witch is very impressive. Later on in the show, we also realize that Miss Wardwell is evil and is using Sabrina so she can become the Queen of Hell. Sabrina's destiny took a dark shift as soon as she made a deal with the Dark Lord. Although all the witches in the series have signed this book, the Dark Lord specifically needed Sabrina to sign it. Her destiny is far more different than the other witches in the show. Have you guys watched the show? Let me know in the comments below. Honestly, I did, but after season 2 I couldn't anymore. Let me know your thoughts though. Moving on at number 3, we have Lilith. Now the description of Lilith varies depending on your beliefs. In Jewish folklore, Lilith is a female demon. In Luciferian witchcraft and Luciferianism, Lilith is described as the consort of Samael. Other people believe that she is the wife of Satan or that Lilith was the first wife of Adam. But she wasn't that obedient to him and Adam didn't like that, so Lilith left. Then God made Eve, who was more obedient. Lilith became jealous and turned into the snake that made Eve take a bite from the apple. The two were banished from the Garden of Eden and Lilith turned into a demon, her main goal to get revenge on all men. Then you have the people that believe Lilith is a child-killing witch. She wasn't able to conceive, so she was jealous of pregnant women and would go around killing them or stealing their babies. In this case, we are looking at the version in which Lilith is a witch, obviously. In this case, Lilith is working alongside Satan to do his dark bidding for him. Their deal is that if she's with him, then she will work for him. But she's not always obedient, in fact she has gotten frisky with other men. In the TV series Supernatural, Lilith is depicted as a white-eyed powerful demon. She is said to be the first human that made a deal with Satan and promised to serve him. As a result, she became the first demon. In the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, we end up finding out that one of the characters, Miss Wardwell, is actually Lilith. She is referred to as Satan's concubine and the mother of demons, and of course, she's a witch. In fact, she is said to be the first witch in existence. She made a deal with Satan or the Dark Lord. According to her story, she was wandering the wasteland aimlessly when she encountered Lucifer, the fallen angel. She made a deal to heal the wounds caused by the loss of his wings, if he in return helped her. She then pledged allegiance to him and became his handmaiden. In the end, Lilith wants to become his queen, which is why she goes to the extreme lengths to do whatever he tells her to do. Moving on to number 2, we have Sarah Good. Now, if you have seen the Fear Street trilogy on Netflix, then chances are you might be a little familiar with this story. The movie was loosely based off of the real witch Sarah Good, but in the movie they changed her name to Sarah Fear. So Sarah was one of the first 3 women that were accused of witchcraft. It was her, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba. These 2 other ladies were said to be real witches, and when they were accused, they brought forth Sarah Good's name, saying that she was a witch too. Little tattletalers. The townspeople were quick to believe this because Sarah never attended church. She lacked self-discipline and self-control, and she was 38, but apparently she looked like she was 70. That combined with the other ladies' testimonies had everyone against her. In fact, apparently when she was brought in front of the court, a number of witnesses began to twitch and rock back and forth and moan. So they were all like, damn, she's definitely a witch. Look at what she's doing to the people that accused her of being one. Not only that, but her own husband and daughter even admitted to Sarah being a witch as well. And then things kept getting worse and worse for her. At one point in her trial, one of the accusers started acting out and claimed that Sarah attacked her with a knife. In the end, of course, she was found guilty of witchcraft and was sentenced to death. But just before her death, she made a deal with the devil to curse a priest. She said, and I I quote, "I am no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take my life, God will give you blood to drink." Now when she died, apparently the priest and his land both became cursed, just like Sarah claimed it would. To this day, it's said that Sarah continues to haunt the town, searching for those that have wronged her. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Bonis Witches. In 1679 in Bonis, Scotland, a number of women were accused of being witches. These women were Annabelle Thompson, Margaret Pringle, Margaret Hamilton, Bessie Yicker, and another woman named Margaret Hamilton. Now during this time, the hype and fear of witches was dying down. So people were shocked that out of nowhere 5 women were being accused. But rumor has it these women had renounced their baptisms and had been in contact with the devil on a number of occasions. They apparently had eaten, drank, danced, and had intercourse with the devil. Annabelle Thompson even admitted that she had made a deal with the devil for a better life. She had been widowed twice, and so she turned to the devil for help, and in return she would be loyal to him. She then invited the other women to come over and do all these things with the devil with her. The women then apparently formed a demonic pact with each other and Satan. One of the Margaret Hamiltons also admitted that she had met the devil. She claimed that the devil came to her in the form of a black dog, and she said that she was his servant for 3 decades already. And another was accused of using her witch magic to help get wealth. As a result, all the witches were found guilty and were strangled at the stake before being burned to ashes.
Coming in at number 5, we have Frau Perchta. This is a terrifying Christmas witch. Christmas is usually a time of togetherness, happiness, celebrations, and lots of food, right? Well, in Austrian and Bavarian tradition, people have a little bit more to fear. Everyone has heard of Krampus, the half-goat, half-demon that punishes misbehaved children at Christmas, but few have heard of the ruthless Frau Perchta. This old hag is not to be underestimated. Perchta is often depicted as a crone with an iron-beaked nose, dressed in rags and sometimes carrying a cane. The other thing she carries is a bit more sinister, a massive knife hidden under her skirt, and she certainly loves to use it. You don't get the nickname Belly Slicer for no reason. Legends say that the witch punishes bad children and rewards the good. Sounds a bit like Santa Claus, however a lump of coal sure beats what her punishment entails. Frau Perchta apparently hates children who are dishonest and will scrape their tongues if they lie. Unfortunately, being an adult won't save you from the Christmas witch. Frau Perchta has a thing about domestic cleanliness and will punish women if their homes aren't clean enough. Ladies also feel her wrath if they leave their flax unspun, but the punishment doesn't seem to fit the crime. By the 12th night, or January 6th, if your home is messy, your flax left unspun, and you didn't leave out a bowl of porridge for her, Frau Perchta will slice open your belly with her long knife, remove your organs, and fill your insides with rocks and straw. So if you want to avoid being disemboweled by Frau Perchta, maybe skip out on summoning her this Christmas. Coming in at number 4, we have Isabelle Godie. Isabelle Godie is a Scottish woman made famous for her extremely detailed confession of witchcraft in 1662. Unlike many other women at the time, she was not tortured for her testimony and willingly gave it on her own volition. Her confession apparently provides one of the more comprehensive looks into European witchcraft folklore at the end of the era of witch hunts. As a result, she was tried and allegedly executed. In her famous confessions that took place over several weeks, Isabelle Godie spoke about the time she encountered the devil, who she described as having cloven-hoofed feet. She admitted to being in service to the devil, also claiming to have slept with him. Godie spoke in great detail about her coven's activities, like their abilities to shapeshift into animals. She detailed the different charms and chants she would use, and also said she was once entertained by the Queen of Fairies in her home. The details surrounding her execution are muddied at best. There's speculation that she was strangled and burned, while others say she was most likely beheaded. Coming in at number 3, we have Jenny Greenteeth. Straight from English folklore is Jenny Greenteeth, a bit of a Party City looking witch if you ask me, but she's not someone to cross. This witch has a myriad of different names like Wicked Jenny or Ginny Greenteeth, but her MO is all the same. The water-dwelling hag is said to have an affinity for drowning the vulnerable. This legendary witch has a bit of a monstrous appearance with long arms, sharp teeth, and wild hair. Her skin is a grotesque shade of green and resembles duckweed, a type of weed that is one of Britain's most common small water plants. Because of this, she's often associated with ponds and rivers with the weed growing on it, and it's said to be an indicator of her presence. From the 19th century onwards, children have been warned to steer clear from bodies of water, with the threat of Jenny Greenteeth drowning them. It was also said that if they stuck around a pond too long, her long arms would drag them into the water. Elderly folks will also suffer the same fate should they not listen to the warnings. Fun fact, Jenny Greenteeth actually inspired Meg Mucklebones in Ridley Scott's Legend. In at number 2, we have Moll Dyer. Moll Dyer has a bit of a tragic tragic backstory, but her legend still runs strong in the community in which she lived. In 17th century Leonardtown, Maryland, Moll Dyer was an old woman who was accused of witchcraft and ultimately suffered a fate similar to those of the Salem witch trials. Although historical records have yet to prove her existence, there were several Dyers in the area at the time, so it's possible that Moll was simply a nickname. And despite this, there's a street, a stream, and a large rock named after this alleged witch. Legend goes that Moll Dyer was an old hag who lived a semi-isolated life on the edge of town. The townspeople feared her, and the ambiguity of her origin sparked a flurry of rumors. Some believed that she had killed her husband and was on the run, and others believed she was driven out of her previous hometown. There was speculation that she was a healer, and after a series of misfortunes plagued the town, Moll Dyer was blamed and labelled as a witch. On a freezing winter night, the townspeople gathered outside of her home with torches and pitchforks in tow, setting fire to the ramshackle home. Moll Dyer narrowly escaped the angry mob and took off deeper into the woods. Several days later, her body was discovered frozen solid on top of a large boulder, with one hand stretched out to the heavens as if cursing her tormentors. In the years after her passing, they say that the lands became uncharacteristically barren, livestock died, and the men responsible for leading the mob suffered bouts of terrible luck. Today, Moll Dyer is said to haunt the lands in which she died and can be found on the coldest of winter nights. The imprint of her body is apparently still embedded on the rock that she died on and is even on display in the town. Many believe that Moll Dyer partially served as an inspiration for the entity from the Blair Witch Project. We all know how that ends, so I would not recommend summoning Moll Dyer. And finally, in at number 1, we have the Bell Witch. In the top spot is none other than the infamous Bell Witch. The legend of the Bell Witch haunting is a staple in southern United States folklore, and a terrifying story at that, so terrifying that it even captured the attention of a US president. In the early 1800s, John Bell and his family settled in Tennessee on 320 acres of farmland along the Red River. For their first 10 years, their life was good until one day things changed. Strange paranormal occurrences began to plague the family. They would hear pounding on the walls, chains rattling, and John Bell even saw a peculiar and unnatural looking creature. It had the head of a rabbit and the body of a dog. The haunting progressed, and soon the entity was snatching blankets off of the children as they slept and even began to develop a voice. The family would hear faint whisperings and what sounded like an old woman singing hymns. The activity only got worse and the entity began attacking the Bell's youngest daughter, Betsy Bell, leaving welts and handprints all over her face and body. Its voice strengthened over time and they would hear it quoting scripture, carrying on intelligent conversations and still singing hymns. Word of the supernatural phenomena spread like wildfire and even garnered the attention of Andrew Jackson before he became the 7th President of the United States. When Jackson and his men went to investigate the claims, one man from his entourage was allegedly attacked by the Bell Witch and said he felt pins being stabbed into him and was being beaten severely. Some alleged that Jackson later said that he would rather fight the British at New Orleans than fight the Bell Witch. Maybe for good reason too, because John Bell became the main subject of her wrath. The Bell Witch apparently tormented him and caused a steep decline in his health. John Bell eventually died and the witch took responsibility, claiming she had poisoned him. The Bell Witch is said to still haunt the property today and is regarded as one of the most famous pieces of southern lore. Coming in at number 5, we have Baba Yaga. In Slavic folklore, Baba Yaga is a witch who appears as a deformed or ferocious looking old woman. In Slavic culture, Baba Yaga lived in a hut usually described as standing on chicken legs. Baba Yaga may help or hinder those that encounter or seek her out. If she decided that she does not like you or wants to help your cause, you would meet a violent end. Baba is an ogress who steals, cooks, and eats her victims, usually children. She once lived in a hut surrounded by human skulls and a spike as to warn off those who might try to approach her. She was banished from the living realm due to her horrible acts. It is said that now and then she is summoned, and when this happens she wreaks havoc on children, taking more victims. Please don't ever attempt to summon Baba Yaga for favor, although she may decide to help if she chooses, but be warned, it may be the last thing you ever do. Coming in number 4, we have Malin Matsdotter. Malin is a Swedish witch accused during the witch hunt of 1668 to 76. She was a widow and was also accused of being involved in her late husband's passing. Her main accusation was from the children of her village. They claimed that she had been abducting them and bringing them to a secluded place to perform a satanic sabbath. Reportedly, she was trying to persuade the children to join her in performing black magic. She was even accused by her own daughters, persuading the court of her guilt. Malin, along with Anna Hack, were the last victims executed for being witches during the Great Swedish Witch Hunt of 1668 to 76. often referred to as the Great Noise. What makes Malin Matsdotter unique is that she's considered the only witch in Swedish history to have been burned alive. Normally witches were decapitated or hanged before their bodies were burned at the stake, but it appears Malin's refusal to admit to her guilt made the authorities less gracious in their sentencing. Malin firmly maintained her innocence and went out in history. In the end, she refused to shake hands with her daughters. It is said that before her death she gave her daughters to the devil and cursed them for eternity for their part in her sentencing. While burning, Malin did not scream, she did not cry or react to her pain. Some felt this further confirmed her witchcraft. Shortly after her death, one of her daughters was convicted of perjury and she too was forced to walk through death's door. It is now said that if you try to summon Malin, you too will be cursed for eternity like the daughter. She's angry and looking for revenge. You might stand a chance if you are not a woman, as she directs her curses at any woman who crosses her path, as if they are her daughters. But just to be safe, maybe don't try to contact her next time you're near a Ouija board. Coming in at number 3 we have Perchta. Perchta is the witch of pestilence and disease. When she roamed the land of the living, she was known for bringing great disease that killed thousands. It is said she was born during a great plague. From the destruction, she was created to ensure this suffering continued around the world. She is a hideous old woman dressed in black, carrying a rake or a broom. She traveled from farm to farm spreading disease. If she carried a rake, some at the farm would die. But if she carried a broom, all at the farm would die. The Black Plague was first brought to the northern countries via a ghost ship. In 1349, a ship carrying wool set forth from England headed north, but before the ship reached its destination, one by one, they started to get sick and die. Any attempts to quarantine the sick failed. The ship should have sunk or stayed lost at sea, but it is believed that Perchta guided the ship to shore and it reached Bergen Harbour in Norway. I've been there. Rats and fleas on board which carried the plague made their way into the country. The Black Death then spread to Sweden and then into Russia in 1351. This plague was so deadly it killed a third of Denmark's population and half of the people in Norway. It is said that if you did try to summon her, she would bring with her a great plague. Maybe someone was messing around with her in December of 2019. If so, please never do that again. Coming in at number 2 we have Vet. Vet, also known as Mare, is a young woman who would bring bad dreams to people by sitting on them while they slept. She causes sleep paralysis in her victims. Mare often appears in Germanic folklore. She takes many different shapes and sizes. The tale of the Mare might be connected to Old Hag syndrome. You wake up and you can't move. You feel an immense amount of pressure on your chest that makes it difficult to breathe. And you can sense or see someone is in the room with you. It can be a frightening experience. For years, people have taken this experience as a physical encounter with a ghost because when it happens, you are fully awake. You can see, hear, smell, and feel. So it feels like someone or something is holding you down. In essence, you are paralyzed. As well as this, when a person wakes too quickly, hallucinations can occur. This explains the smaller percentage of people who report seeing Vet rather than being paralyzed by her. Vet has a good connection with the mortal world. Some say she has somehow found a way to invade our nightmares, as this is when we are most vulnerable. It does not take much to invite her into your mind, so you need to be careful to not think or speak of Vet. Her attack is terrifying, as there is nothing you can do once she has her hands on you. Once she has you, she can hold onto your mind for years, so avoid her at all costs. And finally, in at number 1, we have Sarah Good. Sarah Good is world famous for being the first witch to be killed in the Salem Witch Trials. It all started on March 1st, 1692, when Sarah Good was charged with witchcraft along with Sarah Osborne and Tituba. Sarah Good was an easy target for witchcraft. She was a beggar, almost at the very bottom of the social ladder. When Sarah Good was charged, she was a complete wreck. Because of all the stress when she was charged at the age of 38, she looked as if she was 70 years old. To top it all off, she was pregnant and also had a 4.5-year-old daughter named Dorcas Good. She gave birth to the infant she was pregnant with in jail. Sarah Good's trial was not successful. The verdict was decided before the trial. She was a witch. Many people testified against Sarah Good, including her husband and her daughter, Dorcas Good. During her trial, she said that she was muttering psalms to herself. Unfortunately, she could not come up with any of the psalms during the trial. Some think that was too much of a coincidence. She also never attended church. Even the most trusting Congregationalists would find that a bit odd. In court, Sarah said that she did not attend church because she did not have clothes good enough for church. Unsurprisingly, she was found guilty, and because she refused to confess, she was sentenced to death. She stayed in jail until July 19th, 1692, when she was was executed. Just before her execution, she was asked to confess. She refused. Instead, she cursed the people, saying, "I'm no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink." It is said that she cursed the land, and a terrible fate followed those responsible for her death. It is said that those who have tried to summon her over the years have been cursed to either have dreadful luck in their life or meet a tragic end. Coming in at number 5, we have Hulda. Hulda is a witch who is rumored to live deep within the forest, secluded from the rest of the world. It is said that if you get lost in the woods, it is usually due to the influence of Hulda's magic. She influences children to wander off on their own so that she may trap them. She has also been known to offer magical favors to children who find her. She just requests in return they visit her again with their friends or siblings. Once Hulda has captured and trapped the children, she will cook and consume them, leaving no evidence behind that they were ever there. If she doesn't eat the children herself, she will serve them to the next children who find her home as a sick punishment. It is believed that Hulda once had a daughter. The daughter was evil and was using dark magic to hurt people, including the rest of Hulda's family. When Hulda lost everyone who she cared for, she destroyed her daughter to make sure she could never hurt anyone again. Since then, she has spent her days luring children to her and destroying them as she did her own daughter. So don't wander off if you're ever walking in the woods, and absolutely do not summon Hulda, or you might notice kids going missing around your neighborhood. Coming in at number 4, we have Agatha Harkness. Agatha is one of the original witches from Salem, though she was not caught. She started as one of the lower witches of her coven, but quickly rose in the ranks amongst her fellow witches. It is said that she practices dark magic. Her mother was once one of the greatest witches. She was confronted by the rest of her coven for practicing dark magic, something that was not allowed. They attempted to destroy her for her crimes, but they did not realize how strong her power was. She drained the power from every other witch in the coven, including her mother, making her the most powerful witch in Salem. It is said that since then she has continued to practice her dark magic, never encountering a witch as powerful or as cunning as she is. She is an evil witch who can manipulate the minds of those around her to commit horrible acts. She is not someone who you would like to cross or make angry. She also has the ability to wipe the memories of those who she controls, meaning they don't even know that it was not their decision to commit their crimes. It is said she still resides in Salem, where her coven once called home. Although it is not clear where, there are a number of historical sites in Salem one could visit if looking for Agatha. If you did want to contact her for some dark reason, it does not come easy. You have to make a sacrifice for her to bother making an appearance. She requires a personal sacrifice of something that you love, whatever that may be for you. Maybe burning your childhood toy or something else you were attached to emotionally. If you do summon her, you might not get what you wanted. If she likes you, she might grant whatever you seek, but if not, you might unleash a great evil not only on yourself but back onto the world. I think it would be best for everyone that we leave Agatha to whatever realm she is currently hiding in. Coming in at number 3, La Llorona. Is she just a legend, a ghost, or maybe a witch? Some believe La Llorona to be a powerful witch. How else would she have remained so strong in the mortal realm after her death and able to trap so many victims? The story of La Llorona is that long ago a woman named Maria married a rich man with whom she eventually had 2 children. Then their marriage hit a rough patch. Her husband spent less and less time at home, and whenever he was home he paid attention only to the children. Eventually she sees him with another woman. Enraged beyond reason, some versions claim Maria drowned her 2 children, but she immediately regretted it, crying out, "Oh my children!" Maria is sometimes said to have drowned herself afterwards. However, not everyone believes that she did drown herself. Some say her rage sent her deep into seclusion, where she turned mad and began studying dark magic. She wanted revenge from what her husband had done to her, but she got lost in her grief and rage and forgot her original reason. All she could think of now was her children and the anger she felt. Now she roams the earth looking to steal children from their mothers. Children are warned not to go out in the dark, for La Llorona might snatch them, throwing them to their deaths in the flowing waters. There is one warning: if La Llorona is stalking you as one of her next victims, you will hear her crying. Once you hear this, there is little that can be done to stop her. If you were to summon her, she would not benefit you in any way. There is no bargain you could strike with her. She only knows pain and destruction. Coming in at number 2, we have Sally the Dunstable Witch. The story of Sally came from the late 19th century about an elderly woman who lived in Dunstable, Bedford, Bedfordshire. She was allegedly a little old lady living alone with her cat. When perhaps out of boredom or being fed up with her life, she turned to the dark arts. Allegedly, the town found out about her practicing dark magic. They stormed her house and pulled her into the town square. They proceeded to burn her at the stake. But Sally had planned for this. Somehow, she found a way to survive the burning and took a new form. As she burned, she cursed the village and promised to get revenge. On her return, she was plaguing the church, performing her magic to make the village believe the devil was among them. Scared, they called in an exorcist. He discovered Sally and her magic. It is said that he backed her into a corner and was able to trap her. Once trapped, they buried her in the graveyard. It is said that they gave her grave a peephole, as they always wanted to tell that she was still in there. The townspeople were terrified she would once again return to terrorize them. She is still used as a tale to this day to get the children to behave, saying if they didn't, she might return. Maybe if you found her grave, you could peer in to see if she is still trapped, or maybe she's already escaped. And finally, in at number 1, we have Guahona. The Guahona is a creature in Cantabrian legend resembling a disfigured human female. She is thought to resemble one of the many forms of witches and hags of medieval Europe. She is covered from head to toe in an old thin black cloak. Her hands and feet are not bird legs. Her face is yellow and consumed by rough and hairy warts. Her eyes are tiny and bright as stars. Her aquiline nose and mouth contain a single black razor-sharp teeth, which extends long enough to be under her chin and used to suck blood. The creature only appears at night. It is unknown where she is meant to sleep during the day, although it is suspected to be hiding underground. Guahona invades homes without getting noticed and walks silently towards healthy young children to suck their blood in their sleep by sticking her tooth into their veins. She does not kill them, instead leaving them almost bloodless, so when they wake up in the morning they will be tired, pale and discolored, so looking like me. Guahona also attacks adults. Why do all witches seem to hate children? It seems if you summon any of these witches, you'll be putting children in danger. Being drained of all your blood does not sound like a nice way to die. Nope.
Kicking off our list today, we have Gide Spademanger, one of the first women executed for sorcery in Denmark and in Scandinavia. In 1543, King Christian III of Denmark equipped a fleet of 40 ships to chase away an imperial Dutch fleet from the coast of Norway to the Netherlands. Outside of Helsinki, his fleet was stuck in a calm, and the whole project failed. Soon, a merchant's wife named Gide Spademanger was arrested and tortured, believed to have gathered a group of witches in a valley outside the city and enchanted the ships. She eventually admitted to conducting a spell with a coven on a hill above Elsinore and named several more people that were involved, male and female, including vicars, which led to the expansion of the witch trial. Her trial was handled by the royal governor Eskebild. She also said that the enchantments would never disappear unless Gide herself was allowed to remove them personally. The people that she named were arrested and tortured to an extent quoted as so hard their limbs were separated, but none other than Gide confessed. In November of 1543, the king demanded for the rightful old principal of witches to be burned, but she sadly suffered through further interrogations first before meeting the end of her time. In 4th place, we have Agnes Samson. Starting off this tale, when King James decided to marry Anne, Princess of Denmark, as quickly as he possibly could, this wedding was arranged in Denmark with a proxy standing in for him since he was, located in Scotland. Anne's attempts to join her new husband across the ocean were severely delayed by dangerous and life-threatening storms, so he eventually decided to join her instead. After another wedding ceremony, which the king actually attended, the couple decided to head home to Scotland, with yet another storm plaguing their journey. Witchcraft trials had already begun in Denmark. Remember Gide? I mentioned a minute ago? And the king had taken note. So when it was reported to him that witches East Lothian conspired to cause the treacherous weather that threatened not just his life, but that of his way too young bride, he believed what he was told. Agnes Samson was an elderly woman who was known locally as a healer and a midwife, having cared for and successfully cured many neighbors of ailments throughout her life. She was a widow with several children, living close to poverty in East Lothian. She had been suspected and investigated for witchcraft before, so there was no surprise locally that her name was given. After she was named, Agnes was quickly captured and protested her innocence. The News from Scotland, which was an English-written pamphlet that would have been written in London around 1591, says that Agnes was shaved from head to toe and each part of her body tortured for hours, intentionally to cause intense pain. The devil's mark was found, and she confessed, saying that she and hundreds of other witches attended North Berwick Kirk on Halloween night to meet with the devil to end the life of the king. She claimed the devil appeared to her as a black man, a dog, or a hayrick. Agnes also mentioned various attempts to obtain the king's shirt or other personal linens in order to work her charms. She had attended a witches' convent at North Berwick with her son-in-law, where they collected bones and powdered them for sick charms. To prove her magical powers, she told the king the exact words that had passed between him and his new wife on their wedding night. Agnes's trial was presided over by a judge, with a jury of 17 men from East Lothian, many of whom would have known Agnes personally. After hearing the evidence, they found her guilty of 49 out of the 51 charges. In January of 1591, she was taken to Edinburgh Castle and met her end by way of a rope necklace, with her body then being burned at the stake. The naked ghost of a bald Agnes is said to roam the palace of Holyrood House, the official Scottish residence of the British monarchy. Let me know in the comments if you've ever been or if you've seen Agnes yourself. In the middle of this scary sandwich, we have Angèle de la Barthe in third place. Born around 1230 in Toulouse, France, she was a noblewoman and a Gnostic Christian, which was a sect that was considered heretical by the Catholic Church. By definition, Gnostic Christian is a term that refers to various branches of early Christianity that claim to have special divine knowledge. They have different views of the Bible, Jesus Christ, salvation, and God compared to traditional Catholics. They have diverse teachings and practices such as Valentinianism, Sethianism, Manichaeism, and Mandaism. Some of them regard Jesus as a human being who became enlightened or Christed, while others see him as a divine being who came to lead humanity back to the light. In 1275, Angèle was accused of having sexual relations with Satan, and she was impregnated by him, giving birth to a baby that had the head of a wolf and a serpent's tail. This being consumed human flesh, and Angèle stole infants to feed it. When she was arrested, she was tortured and eventually confessed that the accusations were true. She was sentenced to death and burned alive, making her the first in Europe to have her life ended from accusations of witchcraft. Also, fun fact for you. At the time, it wasn't illegal to have sexual relations with demons. If you have access to a time machine out there, don't get any ideas. In second place, Perkna Hosman was a midwife, born sometime between 1510 to 1527, where she lived and worked in Bavaria. Her trial was one of the most ruthless witch trials in Germany. Perkna's life had been unremarkable until her arrest on charges of witchcraft, sorcery, and vampirism in the year 1587. After her arrest, she was subjected to terrible torture. Go figure, until she confessed to her deeds. According to her confession, soon after she became widowed in 1556, when she was working in the field of the city, she had made arrangements to meet a male co-worker for sex in her cottage later that evening. But he had not arrived. Instead, a demon had come dressed in his clothes. She established a relationship with said demon, named Federlin, who made her swear allegiance to the devil and promised to rid her of poverty. Hey, sounds pretty tempting. During her confession, she stated that she had sworn herself to Satan and written it on a contract, and Federlin had then taken her to the real devil and confirmed her contract, after which they had drunk wine, consumed the roasted flesh of young humans, and had sex. And in case I need to clarify, she had intercourse with Federlin, not the devil. Plot twist, I know. She described visiting the devil often, and her demon lover had also visited her plenty to have sex with her, even in the streets at night and while she was in prison, leaving every time she said the name of Jesus. Alright, well, that's one way to come down from it. Federlin had gifted her the magical ointment she used to harm her victims, which included humans of a variety of ages, animals, and even crops. She confessed to having ended the life of many young during her work as a midwife by applying the special salve or putting pressure to their foreheads and to have sucked their blood like a vampire. Perkna also confessed to having eaten the young with other witches and using their hair for sorcery. The full list of crimes she confessed to was very long, with her victims including 41 young humans, 2 mothers in labor, and a multitude of other people and animals, including cows, pigs, geese, and a horse. The decision of authorities was swift and unanimous, with the church and royal court finding her guilty and sentencing her to death. Before being burned, she was first taken through the city and stopped 5 times before reaching the place of execution. At the first stop, they branded her left breast and right arm with irons, then her right breast at the second stop, her left arm at the third, with her left hand being then branded at the 4th stop. Once they reached the place of execution, her right hand, with which she had made her oath as a midwife, was cut off before finally being burned alive at the stake. Her ashes were not allowed to remain on soil, but were then dumped in a stream. In first place, we have Gilles Garnier. I swear I don't intentionally plan to name male witches as the worst on my list, but they tend to commit the most heinous acts throughout history. And before anyone wants to try to correct me in the comments again, men have often been named as witches throughout time. Continuing on, Gilles Garnier was a reclusive loner living in the woods around Dole, France. Despite being a solitary man, he got married in 1572. Historians have reported that Gilles was ill-equipped to provide for his family because he wasn't a very good hunter, being used to only having to provide for himself until that point. That's when he started hunting something else. Hey, anyone out there want to guess? Come on, I bet you can. Alright, I'll give it to you. Human flesh. The first hunt happened around September 29th of 1572 when Garnier killed a young woman, allegedly well in the form of a wolf, and brought some of the flesh home for his wife to eat. How, thoughtful? Throughout the autumn, more young humans were found unalived and mutilated, including another young woman that Gilles bit and clawed at, but was interrupted by passerbys before fleeing. The girl sadly succumbed to her injuries a few days later. In November, Gilles ended the life of a young man this time, enjoying the flesh from his thighs and belly before tearing off a leg to save for later. I could name more, but I'm feeling a little queasy as it is. This caused a stir amongst the townspeople, who believed it was a werewolf who was committing the horrors. Many folks had witnessed a humanoid-looking wolf near the scenes of the crimes, with the animal darting off once it was aware of being seen. Then in January of 1573, there was one last death. This time, villagers heard a child screaming and the sounds of a wolf, witnessing the wolf attempt to flee the scene, but changing into the form of Gilles as it did. He was then arrested, put on the rack, and confessed to killing the young and consuming their flesh. At his trial, more than 50 people testified, and he was found guilty of lycanthropy, the ability to turn into an animal, and witchcraft. He and his wife were burned at the stake on January 8, 1573.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Wabanaki Ghost Witch. This is a terrifying witch that scared Native American tribes for centuries. According to their legend, this witch was one who practiced evil magic when they were alive, and when they died, they came back to life as an undead monster. Its name is Skadigamuch, and it craves human flesh and blood. The worst part, if it's coming for you, there's no stopping it. It will kill and devour any and everything that gets in its way. Now, during the day, this witch appears as an inactive human corpse, but as soon as night falls, the corpse comes to life and goes off searching for prey. In fact, it moves fairly quickly. It can transform itself into a ball of light and wisp around fast looking for someone to snack on. Once it finds its victim, it attacks from above, so you literally can't even see it coming. The legend also tells the story of one time this witch attacking a whole group of hunters and warriors. They were out spending the night in the forest when they were all attacked and killed one by this witch. I mean, it normally prefers to attack individuals who are on their own, but in this case, it must have been fairly hungry because it just devoured that whole group of men with ease. The only way to kill this witch is to burn her body right after she dies, or else she will come back to life and make your life a living hell. Coming in at number 4, we have Grilla. In Iceland, during the Christmas holidays, children have to watch themselves if they've been naughty that year. They don't find lumps of coal in their stocking. No, they run the risk of getting eaten by a nasty witch named Grilla. Grilla is depicted as a troll-like witch that lives in the mountains of Iceland. She has the ability to sense misbehaving children, and then she keeps note of all the kids who have wronged. Some depictions of her have her with hooves and 13 to 15 tails. Other depictions have her with nasty dirty nails, ears that droop to her chin, and eyes at the back of her head. Also, she's massive. You definitely don't want to get on her bad side. Did I mention that she likes stew? Stew, of course. That's where she puts the naughty children and then eats them right up. I should also mention that Grilla has been married 3 times. In total, she has 72 children. 72 children that she can send after you if you ever do her wrong. Some of these children are said to be murderers, others are said to be pranksters. With her most recent husband, she had 13 children who are called the Yule Men. They're kind of like the dwarves from Snow White, except they're evil. So the Yule Men are all gnome-like creatures that go around torturing households in their own way. They are named accordingly. For example, you have Spoon Licker that will go around licking all your spoons. Then when you go to use the spoon, you get a nasty taste in your mouth. Or you have Window Peeper. He likes to lurk outside your windows and then just watch you do stuff, you know? Sometimes he will even steal the stuff he sees. On the 13 days leading up to Christmas, these Yule lads will visit families one by one. Oh, you thought that was all? No, think again. Grilla also works alongside the Yule Cat. The Yule Cat is this monstrous beast that is said to tower above even the tallest houses. On Christmas Eve, she goes around eating So not only do you have to worry about Grilla, but you have to worry about her evil kids and her vicious cat that she can send after you as well. Moving on to number 3, we have Nailba. In 1990s, families in Bangalore were worried after hearing a story about a scary witch named Nailba. Story goes that one night a family was about to go to bed when they heard the sound of one of their family members' voice coming from outside. The father of the house opened the door about to welcome them in, but when he did, to his horrors, it was not his relative. Standing before him was an old woman, but before he could even say anything, this woman attacked him and instantly killed him. The next day, something similar happened to another family. It was late at night, they were about to go to bed when they heard a familiar voice outside. This time, the old woman attacked and killed the man with her nasty sharp nails. After a number of deaths in the village, everyone got spooked. They thought this was the works of a serial killer, but no, it was indeed something much worse. It was the work of this evil witch. And some believe the story to be true, and are fearful that they too will fall victim to her. In order to avoid encountering her, people would write Nailba on the door, which means come tomorrow. The witch would then see the sign and come again tomorrow to try and kill you. But as long as the words were still written on the door, you were safe for her. You know, like she'd come, oh, I'll come again tomorrow. Oh, okay, I'll come again tomorrow. You know, you get it. If not, she will try to trick you into opening your door for her, and then bam, you're dead. In our second spot today, we have La Lechuza. This is a popular witch in Mexican folklore. Legend goes that Lechuza was a woman that was caught practicing dark magic. The townsfolk were horrified and as a result had her killed. But Lechuza never fully died. She came back, taking form as a creepy bird lady, and promised she would seek revenge on the town. Now, she is a shapeshifter. She has the ability to look like a normal woman during the day, and then as a huge bird with a human's face during the night. I mean, her name literally means owl in English. So she's just this terrifying owl lady that likes to kill innocent people. In some stories, she is described as being 7 foot tall with a wingspan of 15 feet. She flies through the night hunting her prey. She often will perch on a tree branch and just watch from above. If you hear a bird screech at night, this is a bad omen. It's a sign that Lechuza is out looking for her next victim, and it could be you. Also, this witch can pretend to be a baby to trick her victims. She can disguise her voice and cry outside your door, so you're like, oh no, someone left a baby on my doorstep, and then you go outside and it's not Harry Potter left by Dumbledore. No, it's Lechuza, who will swoop down and carry you away with her sharp talons. She has the strength to carry a full grown man, so no one is safe. She's also known to attack from windows. You might be trying to sleep when all of a sudden you hear this annoying whistling or screeching noise coming from outside your window. You get so annoyed you whip the window open and bam, she'll attack you and scratch your eyes out. She's also known to run people off the road, so she's definitely someone you don't want to take on. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Black Annis. Black Annis is a tall, nasty witch from English folklore. She is depicted as having a blue face with glowing eyes, long sharp teeth, and claw-like fingers, which she uses to rip the skin off of her victims. So this witch is said to haunt the countryside of Leicestershire. She waits in the woods there until she finds herself the perfect victim. She will then pounce on them, rip them open, and feast on them. She likes to drain them completely of blood by sucking it out of them, and then feasts on their insides. To make matters worse, she will keep the deceased with her, and once their skin is completely dried out, she will use the skin and sew it together to make clothes for herself. Like what the actual hell? It's giving me Buffalo Bill vibes for sure. Due to this legend, kids were told never to go into Dane Hills alone, for that's where she supposedly lives. Not only that, if you're out in the woods and hear a high-pitched howl, you know that she's close. Furthermore, if you listen carefully, sometimes you'll be able to hear her sharp teeth grinding together as she waits for her prey. Starting off this countdown, we have the West Branch Witch. This witch is pretty famous in Ohio. So legend goes that there's this witch that many people have encountered in West Branch State Park. This witch tends to